Bridget walked leisurely down the long hospital corridor, adjusting the white kerchief that was riding on her side. Her footsteps echoed in the morning silence, broken only by the occasional cough from the wards and the muffled voices of the nurses on duty. She'd been working as a nurse in the ward for the critically ill at Volga Secondary Hospital for 15 years, ever since she'd divorced her deadbeat husband. Bridget remembered well the unfortunate day she'd found Ethan with another bottle of beer on the couch, surrounded by his equally worthless friends. Patience had run out. She had kicked her husband out the door, leaving her alone with 2 daughters in her arms, Cassandra, the older, and Amanda, a toddler. Since then, Bridget pulled the whole house on himself, worked around the clock, not shying away from the dirtiest work, just to feed herself and her daughters. It was useless to get child support out of her ex-boyfriend. Ujno very cleverly but politely he presented then a certificate of disability, then a fake paper on meager earnings. And she couldn't help herself and didn't have enough to ask from this rascal they would manage on their own. The work of an orderly was exhausting, but in general Bridget was even grateful to fate. The staff was good, the doctors and nurses respected her, and she knew how to get along with the patients. So today she rushed to the ward early in the morning. She had to prepare the newcomer in the ward, Julia, a young but very heavy patient. She had been brought in last week, her face haggard, her eyes sunken in, her skin gray. It was obvious that she had not long to live. But for some reason, Bridget felt warmth and compassion for her. Maybe it was because Julia was a little older than Cassandra. Or maybe it was because she held herself with dignity, never complaining, even though she tossed about in the heat of the night. The doctors had been very hesitant to operate on her in such a state, but it was pure madness. There was little chance of survival. Only Sylvester, a young experimental surgeon, took on such cases. But he, as luck would have it, was away on holiday in a neighboring state, and time was running out. Bridget sighed and grasped the doorknob with determination. She would get Julia back on her feet, and then Sylvester would be back. She couldn't give up without a fight. The room was stuffy, smelling of medicine. Julia lay with her eyes closed. Only her ragged breathing told her she was still alive. Bridget tiptoed over to the bed and adjusted the pillow. "Julia, sweetheart. It's time to get up. Rounds are coming up. I need to wash and tidy up." The patient slowly opened her cloudy blue eyes and smiled weakly. "Bridget, thank you. But what's all this for? I feel like I'm not going to make it. Why don't you just let me go in peace?" Tears came to her throat, but the nurse raised her eyebrows sternly. "What are you talking about? We can't give up. Do you hear me? Let's fight. Come on, sit down slowly. I'm going to wipe you." With infinite tenderness and care, Bridget wiped Julia's bloodless face with a damp cloth, helped her change into a clean shirt, brushed her blonde hair and braided it. "That's better. They'll bring a nice breakfast, and then the doctors will come. You just hang in there, okay, Julia?" She stroked the nurse's rough hand again in gratitude and closed her eyes. She was so tired, and Bridget wanted to howl with despair and helplessness. Oh, if only it hadn't been for Sylvester's bloody holiday. I'm sure he'd have worked something out, got Julia back on her feet. Now, what can they do? With a heavy heart, Bridget left the room and leaned against the wall, tears welling up in her eyes. How many of Julia's kind had she seen over the years? Young, beautiful, full of plans for life. And in the end, just a gravestone with dates of birth and death. "Bridget, what's the matter?" Judy, the nurse, asked me sympathetically. "It's a shame about Julia. She's so young. She has almost no chance. And if only our miracle worker were here now." "Yes," sighed Judy. "It's a disaster, but it's still a lot of work. Come on, your patient in Ward 5 has thrown up again." Bridget, wiping away her tears and shaking her head, followed the nurse down the corridors of the hospital. What was the use of killing herself? She had to work. Maybe there would be a miracle for Julia. The atmosphere on the ward was tense. Mr. Hubert, the head of the department, was pacing around his office, glancing at the telephone. For a week now he had been waiting for news from Sylvester, the only one who could save the wife of the wealthy businessman Lester. But the man had disappeared into thin air. He'd gone on holiday, switched off his mobile phone. The days were counting down. Mr. Hubert smoked nervously. What kind of man is he? Always doing things his own way, never consulting anyone. How many times had I, the head of the surgical department, told him not to show off, to work like everyone else, and there would be fewer conflicts. But no, this upstart Sylvester is always on his own methodology, his own approach. And yet, most importantly, he can do miracles, perform operations that others have never dreamed of. Mr. Hubert was distracted from his bitter thoughts by a knock at the door. Lester's bewildered face appeared on the threshold. "Didn't you find your genius?" The businessman asked gloomily, sitting down in his chair. The manager hesitated. "Here's the thing. Sylvester is now out of range. He has gone to his relatives urgently, but we will throw all our forces. I promise to carry out the operation without his participation. Of course, the risk increases, but I will not allow any risk." Lester interrupted him firmly. "I don't want to experiment on Julia. I'd rather have it this way. Easier, less torture. Don't try too hard. Do you understand, Hubert?" Mr. Hubert looked at his visitor in amazement. "That's news to me. What is this? A rich man won't fight for his wife's life. Anybody in his place would be on his feet, pouring millions of dollars into helping his beloved. And this one doesn't even want to risk it." The superintendent squinted his eyes, looking intently into Lester's calm, indifferent face, as if the fate of his nearest and dearest was not in question. "'Tis strange. Oh, how strange. But who is he to pry into another man's family?" "You can't force a man," Mr. Hubert said dryly, rising. "Well, that's your right. We'll continue with Julia's standard treatment. God willing." Lester nodded briefly and went out without even saying goodbye. And the superintendent sat for a long time, drumming his fingers on his desk. He did not like the whole story. Oh, he didn't like it. In the meantime, things were going on in the ward. Julia was writhing in pain, gasping, seething. Bridget rushed around, changing compresses and injecting painkillers, but it didn't get any better. "Bridget, honey," she whispered, grabbing the nurse's hand. "Don't. Let me go. It's the end soon anyway. At least this way I won't have to suffer." Bridget's heart was bleeding at these words. How could it be? Why did everyone give up? And her husband seems to be resigned to it. There really is still a chance. She could hear the nurses whispering that if Sylvester hadn't gone on holiday, he could have saved Julia. And then Bridget was struck by a thunderclap. What if I tried to find him myself? But not just sit idly by and watch Julia fade away. We must act now. With her mind made up, she whirled into the residence room. Judy said Sylvester had relatives in a neighboring state. In Berrysville, I think, Bridget said firmly. That's right, she was the one who took the parcel to the post office. When he'd asked her to drop by to send a present to her mother, that was where she should go. Bridget went to the superintendent. "Mr. Hubert, I need a day off for a family emergency. I really need it. I can't do it." The superintendent wrinkled his nose in displeasure, but waved his hand. "Go anyway, you're of little use now. You're not yourself." And Bridget, feeling her heart pounding with fear and hope, ran out of the hospital. Just in time to find Sylvester, to ask him to come back, to save Julia. And then whatever happens, If only I didn't feel guilty about not doing all I could. Mr. Hubert drummed his fingers nervously on the table, listening to the ringing of the receiver. Come on, pick up the phone, don't procrastinate. You know I'll call. You told me to let you know right away, Mr. Hubert said when he finally heard a click on the other end of the line. It was Lester's husky voice. Hello, Mr. Hubert. Mr. Lester, I'm calling about your wife, the superintendent said frantically. There was a tense silence at the other end. Then Lester said softly, Is Julia worse? How so? Mr. Hubert was mentally indignant. He asked her to take it easy, and now he's pretending to be a loving husband. Aloud, however, he said, choosing his words carefully. You see, Mr. Lester, the dynamics are not good. Not good at all, frankly. I'm afraid our efforts may not be enough. Lester was silent for a moment, hummed, then stretched out thoughtfully. I thought I told you not to disturb the natural course of things. Let it go as it goes. Do you understand me, Mr. Hubert? What a sly beast, thought the superintendent through gritted teeth. All innuendo and innuendo and innuendo. A worthy reward for a special approach. Ugh, Mr. Lester. I understand you perfectly well, he began patiently. But you must come to my aid, because this is a difficult case. I mean, if you don't do anything about it. Do I mind? Lester interrupted. There was a note of steel in his voice. You act, Mr. Hubert, as circumstances dictate. But don't try too hard, I beg of you. Certainly no conciliums or luminaries from the capital, it's no use. You know that. It's just a lot of pain for Julia. Mr. Hubert bit his lip. Good for him, Lester, to reason. It's not his head in the noose if anything happens. But for him, Hubert, there's no getting out of it. It's good if he's sacked rather than locked up, but he can't refuse. And they're promised. A new flat. A new car. It's not a pound of sultanas. I see your point, said Mr. Hubert, muffled at last. We'll act according to circumstances, said Mr. Hubert. But do you realize, Mr. Hubert, what if there's a committee or an inspection? Don't worry, Mr. Hubert, said Lester, almost affectionately. Do your work in peace. But you can be sure of my gratitude. I always keep my word. Well, look, sighed the head of the department. I hope for you. And you're doing the right thing. Lester grinned. All right, keep the treatment going, but don't overdo it. You understand me? And don't forget about your Sylvester. You know what I mean? Yes, I do, Mr. Hubert confirmed doomily. Everything will be done. Good. Keep me posted then. The receiver buzzed. Mr. Hubert slowly put down the receiver, wiped his forehead. That's the way it is. It's too late to backtrack. He twisted around in his chair mindlessly, walked over to the window, and lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag. No, that's right. Sylvester better not come back now. He's a fucking idealist. He'll get involved, start saving the day. No, let him stay on his holiday. Mr. Hubert put out his cigarette butt with relish and opened the window with determination. It's all right, we'll get through it. It's a big risk, of course, but it's a big score. Is it the first time? It's painful at heart, but there's no way to retreat. Now it's win or lose, he mentally corrected himself. It's definitely doom and gloom. He picked up the telephone receiver, started dialing the number of the resident's room. Give the order, confirm the order to Sylvester. Well, Sylvester will rest and gain strength, and will manage without him. Everything is for the best, the head of the department decided to himself. The train rattled its wheels, taking Bridget away from the city, away from the hospital where her Julia was slowly fading away. Away toward the unknown, but also toward the tiny ghostly hope of a miracle. God help me, the nurse whispered frantically, shrinking into a ball. In her hands, Bridget held a slip of paper with an address on it. Let me succeed. Let him listen to me. Yesterday's events overturned the heart with expectation. Outside the window, the shambling cottages, the sparse abandoned platforms whizzed by. Bridget counted the stations to Birchwood. Again and again she ran her plan through her mind. She would find the doctor and he would come back. He would come back, he wouldn't, because a human life was at stake. Sylvester rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly and slammed the medical records shut. It was no use. For the second week, he had been traveling around the region in search of a specialist who could help his son Martin. But all to no avail, neither psychologists nor neurologists, and even the praised professors from the capital did not take up the challenge. Martin's case was too complicated. 2 years had passed since Linda's death, 2 years of pain and helplessness. Sylvester still couldn't come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife, but he held on for the sake of his son. But Martin, it was as if overnight he turned from a cheerful and agile boy into a pale shadow. He shut down, stopped talking. And then he collapsed, his legs gave out and he lost his appetite. Doctors only spread their hands, no physical reasons for paralysis did not find. And Sylvester suddenly realized with all clarity that he must go. Never mind the leave, never mind the intrigues of the superintendent. To hell with everything. He was a doctor, and his duty was to save lives. He can't do anything about Martin yet. Mum will look after him, wouldn't be the first time. She will, Bridget, he said firmly, buttoning up his suitcase. I'll tell you what, you and I will be right back. I'll just drop in on your mother and warn her. Bridget glowed and almost kissed his feet. Thank you, darling. Thank you. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't refuse, with such a heart. Sylvester just waved it off. Personal dramas are personal dramas, but work is work. And yet Mr. Hubert couldn't call, could he? Was it pride, or was he afraid that Sylvester's stardom would overshadow his own? It was Birchwood. It flew by in one breath. Sylvester drove the car as fast as he could, just in time to explain to his mother, to ask her to keep an eye on his son for a few days, and to rush back to Julia at the hospital. Nothing could stop him now, neither the intrigues of his superiors nor anyone's disbelief. Only forward, racing against death. Bridget sat beside him, gripping the doorknob, silent, only occasionally sighing convulsively. She was going through hardship. It's not easy for her, either. So many years as a nurse, and still cannot get used to the grief. She cares for every patient. And Sylvester suddenly caught himself thinking that he was glad of her presence even in this mad race. He did not want to stay alone. She was an island of hope and warmth. They stopped at his mother's house. Sylvester flew up to the 3rd floor, jumping over the steps. Mum, I'm going into town to work. I've got an emergency, an operation. You're with Martin for now, okay? For 3 days, no more. The mother only sighed, nodded habitually once. I'll look after him here. The son rushed into the room, pressed his cheek against the top of his son's head for a moment. Martin, I'll be right back. Will you stay with your grandmother for a while? All right, and I'll bring you a present, a new book. The son didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't even look at his father. Sylvester, gritting his teeth, turned away. Nothing. They would fight. He would find a way to get through to his son. Right now he had to save someone else's life because he was a doctor, and that's what he should do. The journey back seemed endless. Sylvester glanced at his watch every now and then, wondering how long it would take to get to town, how long Julia would last. Bridget stood motionless, afraid to breathe, as if the slightest movement or word might upset the delicate balance of their plan. When the lights of the hospital appeared ahead, the sky was already dark. Sylvester pulled up at the checkpoint and jumped out of the car. "Bridget, I'm going upstairs to talk to Mr. Hubert first. God willing, we'll manage." He squeezed the nurse's fragile shoulder, desperately believing that he could do it. He couldn't help it, because he was the only one who could. Everyone was waiting for him: Julia, his tormented relatives, and this sweet, kind woman who had been so lazy to find him in another city and pull him out of the swamp of grief and despair. "Hang in there," said Bridget Sylvester. The surgeon took a determined step towards the doors of the hospital. Fight and search, find and don't give up, just like in children's books. That was his motto and his path. And let the whole world wait, he would save. After all, that's what he was called to do. Bridget ran into the hospital, tying her dressing gown as she went. After a sleepless night and the mad race from Berezovsky back, she felt utterly shattered, but there was no giving up. Not now that there was a glimmer of hope. There was a strange, ominous silence in the corridors. Bridget stood still for a moment, listening, and then she heard an indistinct noise coming from outside Julia's room. Her heart jumped alarmingly. Was it? She rushed to the door, swung it open, and was stunned. Lester, pale and resolute, was trying to lift his wife's lifeless body from the bed. Nearby stood a gurney, already prepared for the terrible journey. "Lester, are you out of your mind?" Bridget screamed, rushing to her side. "Where are you taking her?" "To the morgue," he said, muffled, not looking at the nurse. "It's all over. You can see she's barely breathing. I told the doctor she only had 5 minutes to live." Bridget felt nausea coming up her throat. "What on earth is going on?" she said firmly. "This is what you call a loving husband, for God's sake. I won't let him in." She blocked Lester's way. "Sylvester will be here any minute. He'll save her. He promised." A strange expression flashed in Lester's eyes, one of irritation or fear. He jerked, tried to get round Bridget, but Bridget was dead. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, grabbing the nurse by the shoulders. "Get out of the way. It's getting late. Don't you see? Julia is my..." He hesitated. And Bridget suddenly thought with horror that he probably couldn't even say it. Dead. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't want to believe it. And that's why he's rushing to the morgue, to get rid of this terrible, unbearable pain. "Lester," she said affectionately, looking into his face. "Sweetheart, but bear with me a little longer. I told you Sylvester would be here any minute. He'll help her," said Bridget. "You'll see." Lester bit his lip, averted his eyes, and his fingers clenched the edge of the sheet, white with tension. "What will he do?" he said faintly. "We've tried everything. It's no use." Bridget felt despair and hopelessness in Lester's voice. Had it cut her to the heart. She involuntarily reached out and touched his white knuckles in a faint attempt to comfort him. And suddenly she froze here, on Lester's wrist, was the faintest whitening of an old scar. A thin, flat, jagged scar, the mark of a deep cut. Bridget stared at the scar as if mesmerized, feeling something strange and disturbing rise up inside her. It was as if she'd seen the dusty yard of the orphanage, a skinny, black-haired boy waving a shard of glass in front of her. "Well, Litterbug, are you going to denounce me? Let me tell you that I broke your pencil." Screaming, crying, burgundy drops on the gray asphalt. The scar, narrow and jagged, a lasting reminder of the day when little Bridget dared to fight back against the orphanage's biggest bully. "Lester," she breathed out through her lips, her eyes fixed on Lester. "You?" Lester flinched, recoiled. Recognition and confusion flashed in his eyes. "Bridget," he muttered, pulling his sleeve down frantically. "You're here, Bridget." He squared his shoulders. She was not afraid now of this sudden past, nor of the impossible future. The important thing now is Julia, Bridget said, looking at Lester seriously. For some reason he jerked as if slapped, took a step back. Anger, resentment, and confusion struggled in his face. Abruptly turning round, he walked out angrily, slamming the door. And Bridget sank powerlessly to the edge of Julia's bed. Jesus, Lester Black. How could this have happened? It's been so many years, and nothing has changed. He's still the same bore, the same bully, only with a more expensive suit, and still as ready to walk through lives and destinies without noticing anything around him. Bridget took Julia's hand again, gazing into her bloodless face. The native was breathing faintly, nervously, but breathing. It was not for nothing that she had sent Lester away then. Not for nothing. Now the main thing was to hold out until Sylvester came. Then everything would be all right. The nurse looked at the door. I wish to God their savior angel would come, Bridget thought. No, Julia hasn't got time, not anymore. And Bridget's own strength is running out too. The only hope is whether they'll make it. She covered the frail, almost weightless hand of the dying woman with her palm. She murmured to herself, without noticing, the ancient, half-forgotten words of the prayer her mother had taught her as a child for peace, for mercy, for a mercy, for a miracle. And it wasn't over yet. It was too soon to give up. As long as she was here, and as long as Julia was breathing, Bridget would fight for her and for her right to live, even if it means coming face to face with the ghosts of the past. As Bridget finished her desperate plea, the door of the room burst open with a clatter, and Sylvester stood on the threshold, breathing heavily, disheveled, in a hastily thrown-on dressing gown. "Where is the sick woman?" he said curtly, glancing round the room. Bridget jumped up, rushing towards him. "Sylvester, thank God you're here. Julia's not well at all. Her husband was about to take her to the morgue, and I had to fight him off." The surgeon's face darkened. He resolutely stepped to the bed, bent over Julia, felt the pulse, lifted the eyelids, looked into the pupils and made a verdict. Still alive, but on the verge. Prep the OR. Immediately. Let's fight it out. Bridget, unable to feel her feet under her from relief and joy, rushed to carry out the instructions. Finally, everything was going to be all right. Sylvester is a magician. He can bring anyone back from the dead. The next few hours merged for Bridget into one endless, agonizing moment. The operating theater, the harsh light of the lamps, the creaking of surgical instruments. Sylvester, collected and determined, bent over Julia's prostrate body. His hands fluttered like wings. Confident, swift, unmistakable. And then there was the ICU room, the beeping of instruments, the long hours of waiting, and finally the joyous, turning over everything inside news. He'll live. The crisis had passed. Bridget ran out into the corridor and ran nose to nose with Mr. Hubert, the ward manager. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, grim and perplexed. "What are you doing here?" He gritted his teeth. "What the hell are you doing here? I thought you were home on a family emergency. You called Sylvester here." Bridget lifted her chin and looked Mr. Hubert straight in the eye. "I did," she said firmly. "What was there to do? You were the one who refused to save Julia. I couldn't just watch her die." The superintendent's face contorted into a grimace of anger. He stepped forward, pointing a finger at Bridget, trembling with rage. "How dare you, you bitch? Who let you? No, just think of it, a nurse telling the chief what to do. That's it. I've had enough. I want you to resign, and I don't want you here." Bridget gasped. She didn't see that coming. For what? For saving a life? A tired-looking Sylvester peered out of the emergency room door. "Mr. Hubert, wait. Why are you shouting? She did the right thing. If it hadn't been for Bridget, it would have been Julia all over again. She'll live now. I promise." But the superintendent just shrugged it off. "You keep your mouth shut. You're the one who put Bridget in trouble with your self-rule. You won't wait. I won't fire you. Such personnel are not on the road. And this one." He waved his head contemptuously in the direction of Bridget. "There's nothing more to do here. Goodbye, then." Mr. Hubert turned abruptly and strode off into his office, and Bridget was left standing in the middle of the corridor, devastated, crushed. So much for gratitude. So much for the happy ending. Sylvester touched her shoulder. Sylvester looked into her eyes. "Bridget, you mustn't kill yourself," he said. "Mr. Hubert's always been crazy, you know that. Don't worry about the job. He'll change his mind when he calms down. In the meantime, I'll help." Bridget smiled, nodded. "Yeah, well, Sylvester doesn't throw words around. But that didn't make it any easier. It hurt to the point of tears. Why would he do that?" Meanwhile, Julia was slowly getting better. She still hadn't regained consciousness, but her vitals were steadily climbing. Sylvester, hands in his pockets, slimmed down, almost never left her bedside. And after each examination, after each check of the instruments, a shy but increasingly confident smile lit up his face. "She will recover," he said firmly. "She will definitely recover. Young, strong." A week later, when Bridget was completely exhausted without her favorite business, an unexpected visitor came to her house, Sylvester himself. "Bridget, help me out," he began. "Here's the thing. Remember I told you about my son? Martin? Of course you do." Bridget almost burst into tears, for she felt so sorry for the poor boy and his grief-stricken father. "Now," continued Sylvester, "I have a great favor to ask of you. Could you look after Martin for me? My mother is exhausted, and the boy needs special care now. I mean, you've done it all before, you know." Bridget took her breath away. Work. A favorite, familiar job. "Of course, Sylvester," she exclaimed fervently, clasping his hands. "Yes, I'd be glad to do it. And be sure I will raise your Martin. Would you like me to get my daughter involved? Cassandra is a teacher from God, trained as a defectologist." Sylvester glowed and kissed Bridget on both cheeks. She was embarrassed by the attention. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you. Now, Bridget, I owe you one. I owe you for life. Anything you want, you ask, I'll do anything for you." She just waved me off. "Oh, come on, what's the score? I'm not here for profit. Well, she's going to dance. She'll know what a pound of flesh is. And at the same time, I'll teach that upstart surgeon Sylvester a lesson. He's a hero. He's always sniffing about, 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 sniffing about." Lester put out his cigarette and grinned. He'd have a handle on those snakes. He remembered the other day seeing Sylvester's son, a scowling boy, in the park with Bridget's daughter, a laughing red-haired girl the same age as Sylvester's boy, hovering near him. Well, he drummed his fingers on the table thoughtfully. There's an elderberry in the garden, and an uncle in the house. The anticipation of revenge was aflame. Now he knew how to hurt both Bridget and the surgeon. It was only necessary to think it over carefully, so that no mosquito could pinch his nose. Lester rose resolutely, headed for the door. "Hey, Joyce," he said to his secretary. "I want you to find this Ray guy right away. You know, I saved him from jail once. I've got a delicate business to attend to," Lester said. The secretary nodded understandingly and clicked on the keys. And Lester, whistling, went out into the street. He felt 10 years younger. Now he was going to show them all who was boss, and Sylvester would have his tail between his legs. He's not going anywhere, but only if everything with his ex-boyfriend would be all right. Something for old debts will pay off, will help to teach this impudent couple a lesson by all rules. It's not the first time. Grinning, Lester got into the Lexus and gave the address. Well, now it's just a matter of tracing the moment and striking a blow that would be remembered for life. Hubert, stay out of my way. If you get in my way, it'll be bad, he hissed under his breath. The car sped off, carrying away the intrigue raging in grim triumph, and Bridget knew nothing of it. She was working at the hospital again. Human Resources called, asking her to come back. Sylvester was right. The head of the department had calmed down and reversed his decision. And no one would let the labor code be wavered. Absorbed in her worries, Bridget forgot all about Lester. His parting threats had faded from her memory. There was no time to worry, there was too much to worry about. Every morning she rushed to the hospital. There was barely enough time and strength to run home, to feed her eternally hungry children, to exchange a few affectionate words, and then to rush back at full speed. Weekends were also busy. To take Martin and Amanda to the park, or to the shop for groceries. This morning Bridget had made a quick sandwich for her daughter and had gone off to run errands. Cassandra volunteered to walk the children. Bridget was in a hurry to get to the hospital. "Julia," she said, adjusting her pillow. "It's all right. It's all right. We'll give you a shot and you'll feel better. And then Sylvester will be here. He'll get you back on your feet in no time," Bridget said. Julia smiled weakly in return. Over the weeks, she and Bridget had become friends, almost twins. Bridget did what she needed to do, tiptoed out of the room and glanced at the clock. "Oh, it's lunchtime soon. I should call and see how the kids are doing. I'll run round to the hospital nursery to pick up Amanda too. She and Martin are so close, aren't they?" Cassandra didn't answer right away. When Bridget finally heard her choked, broken voice, her heart was filled with foreboding. "Mummy," she said, choking back sobs. "Mummy, I don't know what to do. They're gone. Martin and Amanda. They're gone." Bridget's legs gave out. She sat down in her sister's chair, phone in hand. "Missing how?" she whispered. "I'm sorry," Cassandra began to sob. "What happened?" Choking on her tears, she rambled on about their walk in the park. Martin wanted ice cream. She'd gone to the kiosk for a minute, and when she returned, neither Martin nor Amanda were there. Bridget jumped up, dashed across the hospital, ran to Sylvester, who was on duty today. "What?" he roared, clutching his head. "Missing? Are you kidding me?" "How could you, Bridget?" he shouted. "I thought you—" He hesitated, seeing the state she was in, and waved his hand, saying, "We'll sort it out later. Now we must go at once to look for her." And so they were already rushing through the city, searching the back alleys and squares, asking passers-by, looking into all the crevices. But what happened? As if in water. In the third hour of their fruitless search, when despair and terror were at their throats, Bridget suddenly noticed some movement on the roadside. She looked closer. "Oh my God! It's Bill," she exclaimed. The local bum she'd taken out when he was dying of gangrene in the hospital. They saved his leg, but he was left with a limp. "Bill, honey." She ran to him. "Have you seen anybody here?" "My children, a girl and a boy." He stared at Bridget for a moment, but then he suddenly perked up and nodded. "I saw them," Bill mumbled. "I was surprised myself. Why are they without adults? They got into some guy's car and drove off." Sylvester's cheekbones twisted. "Did you get the license plate number? The make?" He rushed over to the tramp. He shook his head in fright. "I couldn't see much. It was dark. A rich car, yes. What's the license plate number?" "Well, numbers, letters. How can you remember?" Bridget woke up. She looked into the tramp's eyes and asked him nicely. "Bill, sweetheart, you remember? Anything at all? They couldn't have just disappeared into nothing. Bill thought about it, scratched the back of his head, and suddenly he said, "The numbers were in order. It's funny, 1, 2, 3, isn't it? And the letters were either K or X in front." Bridget almost jumped for joy. Thank goodness for a trace. Sylvester was about to run to the police. Let them look for him before it's too late. But then Bridget was struck by a thunderbolt. 1, 2, 3. Kylie FX somewhere recently. She'd seen this number before. But where? And then it hit her. Lester's car, of course. A rich white car. Bridget felt a chill go through her. Really? No, it can't be. He wouldn't do that to children, would he? Why not? An inner voice asked snidely. With Julia, he'd do it. And with Martin, your Amanda would be fine. Bridget didn't hesitate to dash to the car. Do you know Sylvester's address? She threw over her shoulder. Call the hospital. God, I wish I'd made a mistake, Bridget thought, but before she knew it, Sylvester was speeding down the motorway. What's the horsepower of the old Renault? 150 kilometers an hour. 40 minutes later, they pulled up at the treacherous fence of Lester's mansion. Bridget swung open the gate without further ado, burst into the house, and immediately heard the familiar cry of a baby. She burst into the living room, burning with righteous anger. Lester jumped to meet her, knocking over a chair, but it was too late. In the corner, Bridget could already see Martin and Amanda, frightened, huddled together on the sofa, confused and crying. "Oh, you." Bridget gasped, slowly stepping on her former mate. "What are you doing? Have you gone mad? You're going to take it out on the children, and you don't remember yourself." She swung to slap Lester, but he suddenly intercepted her arm and slapped her behind her back. "You shouldn't be messing around," he said through gritted teeth. I will." Bridget gasped with rage and broke free of his steel grip. "You will answer for everything. Do you understand? For everything, and for Julia. And for this," she nodded at a shaking Amanda, "I'll drag you through the courts. I'll remember everything." Lester's eyes were filled with hatred. But then there was a sound behind her. "Get your hands off me right now. Or am I not responsible for myself?" Sylvester, flaming with anger, stepped towards them, making a fist. Lester looked at him, at the frightened children, gritted his teeth, and let go of Bridget, spat angrily. "Take your puppies. And I don't want you out of here. You'll have a good time anyway, I promise you that." Shivering from the experience, Bridget picked up Amanda, who was bawling. Sylvester scooped Martin up and held him close. "We'll never set foot here again," he said, glaring at Lester. "But you stay away from us too." Bridget shook her head and held Amanda's sobbing face tighter to her. Her heart was torn with pity for the children and the fear she felt. But the most important thing now was to get them away from here, away from this nightmare. In the car, as Bridget struggled to catch her breath and keep her hands from shaking, Sylvester turned to her. "Bridget," he said quietly and seriously, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have snapped at you, blamed you. If it hadn't been for your determination, your intuition, I dread to think what would have happened. Thank you." The words made Bridget's nose water. Wow. Sylvester, a proud surgeon, and suddenly he's apologizing. It must have been the shock of the experience. She nodded silently, unable to say a word. Now she had to get the kids home to safety and then get to the hospital and check on Julia. God, why do they have to go through this ordeal? As if they haven't suffered enough already, Bridget thought. The next few days became one endless cycle of worry and anxiety. Julia was slowly recovering and was eager to go home. She had to help her with the discharge paperwork and packing. At the same time, Bridget was flitting between work and home, checking to see if Amanda had calmed down. But her daughter was holding up well, just begging. "Mum, let's take Martin to live with us. He's sad on his own. Dad's always at work. It's fun here, isn't it?" Bridget sighed, stroking her head. The two of them had really hit it off. It would be a crime to separate them now. But would Sylvester let his son go? Especially after everything. But Sylvester surprised Bridget by arriving with a shy smile. "Bridget, would you be so kind as to look after Martin?" he asked. "He's been very sad lately. I'm afraid I can't give him the attention he deserves. I'd take him to his mom, but he's so attached to you, especially Amanda." "Well, why don't you let him stay with you if you don't mind?" Bridget almost cried with emotion and gratitude. "Don't worry about the money. I'll take care of everything," Sylvester added. What a man, he doesn't take care of himself. He works hard, and yet he worries about his son. And really could, as many, could have sent the boy to his grandmother. But he worries about the boy's mental comfort. Look at him. Bridget fervently assured him that she would look after Martin responsibly. Life was slowly getting back on track. Finally, the day came when Julia left the hospital, truly recovered. She gave Bridget a big hug goodbye. "If it hadn't been for you," Julia began. But Bridget just waved her off. "Come on, Sylvester's got you from the dead. He's our wizard." At the mention of Sylvester, Julia's eyes lowered in embarrassment, and Brigitte felt like she'd been scalded with boiling water. Good heavens. Julia was already hurrying to the waiting car. She looked back, waved, and shouted, "I'll call you. You're my named sister now. Don't think you're going to get away from me." Bridget smiled back. Wow, a sister. How it is in life. Not so long ago they were strangers, and now they've become so close. And yet I felt uneasy in my heart. Julia's cheeks flushed eloquently at the mention of Sylvester, and he began to visit the Lesters more and more often on various pretexts. He asked about their health, he checked their tests. "Oh, Bridget, you fool," Valentina sighed to herself, trying her best to fight off the jealousy that had flared up. "What is there to dream about? Julia is so beautiful. She's rich again. And you're just an ordinary nurse, even though you're in good standing. And you're not exactly a young woman. How can you compete with her?" But no matter how much Bridget chastised herself, no matter how much she urged herself not to be jealous of other people's happiness, she felt a sharp, unbearable longing in her heart and wanted to howl with hopelessness. So Bridget went to work and housework. And then Bill showed up, the tramp who had seen the children. If it hadn't been for him, he'd come to the hospital one day, stomped round the door. He asked shyly, "Bridget, do you have a job for me? Something to help me out, like scrubbing floors or carrying something heavier? I've been wasting away." Bridget gasped. Wow, Bill's asking for a job. He's going to be a man again. Julia shrugged her shoulders. "Oh, really? Oh, don't tell me. I've got my heart in a bad place. It seems that one day he'll turn up and start shouting for his rights. I'm his wife, his lawful wife, and I'm not going anywhere." Sylvester resolutely covered her palm with his, squeezed it a little. "Don't worry, we won't let you offend. And he wouldn't dare after what he's done. Probably lurk time now waiting. It's for the best." Julia smiled weakly, looking at Sylvester gratefully. What a reliable, true friend he is. Who would have thought we'd be friends like this after all the trouble we've been through? And at first she didn't want to believe it when they told her that her husband was going to treat her like that. She was about to take a breath to thank Sylvester once more for his support when suddenly there came a sharp, shrill screech of brakes from the street. The next instant the front door swung open with a crash, and Lester burst into the kitchen, angry as hell. "Sit down, lovebirds," he said, glaring at them frantically. "Having a family tea?" Sylvester jumped up, covering the frightened Julia. "How did you get in here? What do you want?" he shouted. Lester laughed, an angry, hysterical laugh. "I actually live here, in case you didn't know. But you, mate, you don't want to eat another man's loaf, and get out of my way." He stepped forward, shoved Sylvester firmly with his shoulder, and rushed to the wall where the home safe was hidden in a niche. "Mine, the home safe," he muttered frantically, picking at the code lock. "Nothing, nothing, nothing. Now I'll take some money and hello home. You can go on making nice, I won't interfere." Sylvester tried to push Lester away, to grab him by the arms. But the man, furious and determined, threw Sylvester away as easily as a pesky fly. Julia shrieked, rushed to the door to call for help. But Lester, in some unfathomable way, had guessed her intentions, and in no time at all blocked her way. "Stop," he hissed. "Don't even think about it. I'm in command of the parade now." Sylvester tried again to interfere, to say something. But Lester waved it away without looking, and something glinted dimly in his hand. Julia recognized it as a knife. And the next instant Sylvester gasped and fell on his back. A flickering scarlet blot flashed and disappeared beneath his jacket. Julia screamed, rushed to him. Lester yanked her by the hair, pulling her to her feet. "What did I say? Don't move." "Calm down, you fool. Let me get the money and fuck you." But Julia could no longer hear. There was a nasty ringing in her ears, and everything was blurred before her eyes, and only Sylvester's pale face loomed, trembling and moving. She couldn't remember how she had grabbed the heavy cast-iron frying pan and smashed it over Lester's head with all her might. Lester's eyes bulged and he slowly sank to the ground. Julia, on shaky legs, rushed to the telephone, dialed the number of the ambulance, and baring her teeth, shouted, "Now. A man is dying." Then she called the police, and only then did she rush to Sylvester, trying with trembling hands to feel for a pulse. And then time went on at a frantic, unimaginable pace, stomping feet, slamming doors, scraps of phrases. The police arrived, the doctors. Julia was shouting and explaining, tears smearing down her cheeks. Lester, still not recovered, was hastily handcuffed and taken away. Meanwhile, the paramedics were loading and emotionless, bleeding Sylvester into the ambulance, fussing and running. Julia was sobbing, crumpling her hands over his and her own clothes. Someone was shaking her shoulder. Someone was asking her questions, but the words came out as if through cotton wool. Only one thought pounded in her head like hot metal, echoing in her temples. If only we could get there in time, if only we could save them. Bridget, pale and tense, rushed to the hospital 15 minutes after Sylvester had been admitted. She threw on a dressing gown and rushed to the operating theater. "Chest wound, massive blood loss," one of the surgeons said curtly. "Lung injury. We need a transfusion of at least a liter of blood and plasma," the surgeon explained to the nurses. Bridget nodded and rushed out of the operating theater. Julia, crumpling her nervous clothes with one hand and crumpling her tear-stained handkerchief in the other, sat outside the door. "Let's go," Bridget commanded firmly, taking her under the elbow. "I'll come with you. It'll be quicker for the two of us. Every drop is worth its weight in gold to him now." Julia only sobbed, nodded sluggishly, and went with Bridget, letting herself be drawn toward the unremarkable door marked on her room. And inside, everything clenched with fear and some crazy, mystical hope that suddenly a miracle would happen. Suddenly their blood pouring in would help Sylvester to get out, at least keep him in this world. There was no way such a good man could die. Bridget, of course, had long since got used to death. But she wanted to tear Sylvester from its claws as if he were her own. Gritting her teeth, she watched the dark ruby trickle of her blood. Julia, white as a sheet, shook her head stubbornly at the nurse's request for a break. No way. Time was of the essence right now. Human life is at stake, she replied. When the right amount of blood was drawn, Bridget clung to the wall and walked downstairs to the blood bank, handing over the necessary paperwork and receiving blood bags in exchange. She made her way to the operating theater, handed them to the surgeons. "Take it, save it." She flashed her eyes. "And no tricks. If anything, we'll open our veins, we'll give everything to the last drop." And went to Julia to wait. Now only to wait. Bill could hardly move his legs from fatigue after his work in the laundry, but when he heard about the incident, he came at once. He burst into the donor room, rolling up his sleeve as he went. "Where do they give blood here?" "I want some for Sylvester, too." Bridget nodded silently at the couch. "Lie down, we'll be right there." What a day. What a nightmare. I can't wait to help." When the transfusions were finished and the doctors came out of the operating theater, their faces brightening, Bridget staggered over to them. "Well, how is he, doctor?" He pulled off his mask, smiled with the corner of his mouth. "He'll live, but he'd be long gone if it weren't for your blood, all three of you." He looked thoughtfully at Julia, Bridget, and Bill. Amazingly, this man, he nodded at the former tramp, has the same blood type and RH as Sylvester. B negative. "It's so rare, it's amazing," said the doctor. "I thought they were brothers, for God's sake." Bridget's eyebrows went up. Brothers? Sylvester and Bill? It couldn't be. Though a fragmentary childhood memory came to mind. Nanny had said something about a little brother who'd been adopted and taken from their orphanage. Sylvester had grown up in an orphanage too, he told me. His mom wasn't his birth mother, she adopted him. And Bill was from the orphanage, but he didn't know anything about his brothers and sisters. Really, Julia sobbed. "Doctor, why don't we really check it out? What if they really are family? I mean, miracles do happen." Bridget just waved her hand. "We've all had enough miracles without miracles." But she said something else. "Why don't we just do a DNA test? And that would be the end of it." The surgeon shrugged. "Why not if it's such a big deal?" I was curious. Just a minute, he disappeared into the lab and came out a quarter of an hour later with a sheet of paper in his hands. His eyes glittered with excitement. "Hold on. The truth is about to be revealed. Now, samples number 1. Bridget, Julia, and Bill held their breath. Could Bill really be Sylvester's brother? It's almost a miracle. A tramp and a surgeon separated as children, meeting again. It's mind-boggling. But the doctor's next words left Bridget frozen with her mouth hanging open. Samples 1 and 2 don't match. No relation. And here he shifted his dazed gaze to Bridget. And here's sample number 3. That's you, Bridget, and Sylvester's. You're his sister, by the looks of it. Bridget's eyes darkened. They're joking, aren't they? What sister is she to Sylvester? Oh, please. Julia spoke up, her voice weak with shock. Wait a minute, but you said yourself that Bill and Sylvester have the same blood type. How could they be? The doctor coughed embarrassedly into his fist. There's been a mistake. My fault, I got confused. Nerves, you know. In fact, it was the female sample that matched Sylvester's. What a story. Bridget clutched her head. No, this is too much. That's the last thing I needed was a relative. And then there was Sylvester. She didn't have time to think about it, because a crying but smiling nurse came out of the intensive care unit. Sylvester's awake. He came to his senses, still weak, but conscious. Oh, thank God. Bridget's legs gave out. 'Tis her named brother alive, her everlasting kin. A man alive. The next few days merged for all into one endless whirlwind of joy. Sylvester was rapidly improving. Julia, Bridget, Bill, and Julia ran into his room, laughing, crying, hugging. And when it was revealed that he and Bridget were related, it was a madhouse. Sylvester laughed and cried at the same time and kissed Bridget on both cheeks. My dear sister, you should know how I've been looking for you all these years. When Mom took me away, she wanted to take you too, a widow with many children sheltered astray on a frosty night. Then one day she came home early and froze when she saw ... MP4. Amanda was tidying up the mezzanine, almost through tears. Every single thing she picked up had something to do with it. Old shoes, carefully filled with copies of newspapers and packed still in their native boxes. Folded in 3 legs artificial Christmas tree. A box, sabers, wicked garlands used to still manage to shine in the hands of her husband. A cardboard treasure trove of Christmas tree toys, ski equipment. She froze for a second. Traitorous tears protruded in her gray eyes, unwilling to dry. The children must not see her longing and hopelessness. Away with the sadness. We must pull ourselves together. Her mother's anguished voice came to mind. Amanda, don't hang around all that junk. The top storeroom is a bunch of junk. I'll be sure to get there and throw everything in the bin. I didn't get there. I didn't throw it out. I didn't have time. Not only that, about Amanda's father, the harmful neighbor Chloe liked to joke that she was born of a passing young man, but also her mother burned in a week. The doctor's verdict sounded dire. A worsening ulcer. Too late. You, my dear, came to us. Massive internal bleeding. We couldn't do anything even on the operating table. There was no time. The surgeon in blue uniform cast a pitying glance at the girl huddled on the couch near the operating theater and hurried away into the labyrinth of the hospital corridor. Amanda was left a complete orphan. She had no one in the world now. Yes, her mom complained of occasional stomach pains, but that this would be a death sentence was a shock to Amanda. A fierce, formidable, so combative woman. She seemed to show her power to everyone around her. Healthy, her daughter was pulling her own hump until she was 20. Almost brought her up and taught her. In the yard of their old 5-story building, she managed to keep order. First as the best in the whole neighborhood janitor, then in the role of manager, head of housekeeping. So in all hypostasis, she proved herself that all superiors were always calm in this house. Neither tenants nor electricians nor plumbers are not amused. Joyce will bring them all to their senses in no time. They'll be walking like silk. Mother was a self-taught intellectual with a high school education. She spent all her spare time reading books. The library in the neighboring house diligently sowed reasonable, good, eternal in the masses. She wrote and expressed her thoughts competently. In life, you cannot say that from the janitors appointed by the chief of the yard was inept. Household needs knew by heart. The entire large team of housekeeping on her literally prayed. She got a 2-room flat at the place of her work only 5 years ago. Before that, she lived in a servant's room for janitors with her daughter. And when a lonely old woman died on the ground floor, she was given a flat for her many years of endeavor. Now Amanda got the flat. The girl finished school well, easily entered the pedagogical institute, dreamed of teaching children Russian language and literature. When Joyce died, she had just finished her 4th year. Ahead of her was an internship at the school, and then the defense of her diploma. The only thing she didn't know was what to live on now. How was her mum going to make ends meet on her small salary? And she also dressed her daughter decently. It was a mystery to Amanda. The stash in the bookcase of the metal sesame box ran out almost immediately. At least the tenants contributed to the funeral expenses. The rest was taken care of by the communal workers. After sitting for a month on cereals, pasta, potatoes, and tea and sugar, as Joyce always used to stockpile food from her salary, Amanda realized that she needed to find a job. She wouldn't last long without a new injection of cash. In a month's time, she would be starting her 6-month teaching internship. That meant she would only be able to work in the evenings. How not to remember where many successful businessmen and film stars started their careers? The answer lay on the surface: a waiter in some cafe or bar. A suitable place was found surprisingly quickly in the beer bar favorite, making money on broadcasting sporting events with beer drinks and light snacks. The waitress had just quit. The perky, fast-talking girl had run out of patience. And all because of the fact that the audience in the hall, with a huge TV set on the whole wall, showed emotions in a peculiar way about scored goals or missed goals. In a burst of joy, some red-haired guy would pour the rest of his beer directly into a round hole in the center of the table and float a small coin in it. Another would roughly kick a waitress passing by a table with a full tray. A third one would push the table, jump up angrily, and start walking in circles around other tables, not allowing the employee with the next portions of foamy drink to move freely around the hall. The manager of the establishment saw this disturbance, but their bar was on the outskirts of the city. Its contingent was made up of local laborers. They did not seriously damage the property. They would make some noise and then go home peacefully. Even fights happened only a couple of times and ended in the beginning with a couple of slaps without serious damage. Amanda was told about the vacancy in the bar favorite by her neighbor Chloe, who knew all the news in the district before the district police and grandmothers at the entrance. She caught the girl in the entrance and snidely whispered in her ear, "Amanda, I thought you were looking for a job, not Dusty." "Well, I got you a job, Sebastian. You know his bar, the favorite? He's got Jenny, who's off shift today. Go and have a chat with him. He's a nice bloke. He won't hurt you." Sebastian greeted Amanda with the clinking of glass beer mugs. There was muffled whispering in the huge place, as the dishwasher and the cleaning lady talked to each other. The latter had just scrubbed the floor to a perfect shine, but curiosity got the better of her. Where did Sebastian go? Does he think that an hour before opening he'll find some idiot from the street to take the place of a waitress? Only nobody wants to put up with this drunken crowd. I told him to take my apprentice as a waitress, but he said no. He said she was old. Where have you seen a woman at 47 years old being written off? Let her suffer now without a waitress. Eva also joined the conversation. "Oh, you're right. I offered him my sister Jacqueline as a waitress, and she's only 40. But he refuses. He only wants a younger girl for our hot guy customers, so that she makes their blood boil, as if they were waitresses." Was that a good thing? She was always carrying those mugs around with a sour face. She's got a husband at home, so why make eyes at someone else? Behind the wall, 2 young guys were nimbly taking pizza dough out of cardboard boxes, then pushing them into a large oven. Sebastian's new acquisition and pride is a special pizza oven. The purchased dough bases were smeared with mayonnaise, and then toppings were placed on them, either with sausage or with fish, or simply with grated cheese. Jacqueline and 2 of her fellow students worked at the favorite bar. They were on an apprenticeship from culinary school. Sebastian didn't have a big kitchen. For hot meals, pizza from the oven at most. For snacks, an endless amount of pre-packaged snacks and industrial products: dried smoked fish, chips, dried calamari, spiced nuts, cheeses, sliced smoked sausage for toast and bread, breadcrumbs with salt and pepper. It's impossible to list everything. The bar didn't bother with plates, forks, spoons. The customers included all the disposable plastic utensils they used in the bill. Another thing, beer mugs. There was a whole collection on the shelf above the bar. The owner brought this glass from different cities where he visited. The refined versions were for VIP clients, brought from Prague and Munich. The rest, more simple, bought in souvenir shops. It was in such an environment that Sebastian met Amanda for the first time. In the beer bar for sports fans, there was not yet a single bartender out of the 3 bartenders working here. They will be here by the beginning of the shift. After all, bartenders are the elite of the staff environment. The girl climbed the stairs, pushed the door open with determination, and froze, adjusting her eyes to the semi-darkness in the huge room. All those present turned their heads towards the open doorway, like statues. In front of them stood a young girl of medium height, a fine figure, an inquisitive look of dark gray eyes, a russet fluffy ponytail of hair carelessly gathered, a little pulled down because of a bright hairpin. Light summer jeans, a t-shirt with an intricate print, light white trainers on her feet. That's pretty much the whole portrait of the stranger. "Good afternoon," Amanda said in a ringing voice. "Can I see Sebastian?" "What do you need him for?" Eve answered cheerfully. "He's not here now. He's away on business. And I'm in no hurry. For me, it's either work or he's gone." Amanda grinned. "How so?" The women were as curious as magpies. "If I don't get a job here, tomorrow I'll go to the world with a bag," Amanda explained calmly. And there was so much bitterness in her words that Eva and her companion forgot all the barbs, choked and stared at the girl in expectation of confession. And Jenny and the boys pulled themselves up, all craning their necks to hear better. "I'm not going to tell you much, my dears," Amanda continued. "I became a final orphan a little over a month ago, a student at Pedagogical University. I have to go to practice in the mornings, and my scholarship is only to pay the rent and buy bread and milk, nothing more. I live 2 blocks away. If your boss hires me, I'll try not to let anyone down." At the sound of the door opening again, all heads turned simultaneously. Sebastian himself squeezed into the place, again with a cardboard box in his hands. "Sebastian, did you bring new glasses and mugs again?" Eva called out to him in a friendly manner. They had known each other for years. Once in their youth, Eva had been behind the counter in his first beer bar since the Soviet times. Then she'd given up, grown old. But she didn't want to part with her Sebastian. So they followed the boss from bar to bar, until they organized everything here from scratch, having taken over the old diner from the negligent owners. Eva scrubbed and dusted every inch of the hall on her elbows and knees. Everything around shone with cleanliness and newness. Immediately after the opening, people started to come to the favorite. A penny dripped into the cash register. Her kind Sebastian blossomed and fussed. "Come in, Chief," this time his faithful assistant said. "While you were traveling, we found a new waitress. Intelligent, not like me, but a good girl. We've already interviewed her. She's a good fit, so we're going to take her on tonight and test her out. And we'll see what's what. Let's get Jenny and Jenny working four-handed." And so began Amanda's first day of work, which determined her future. By the beginning of her pedagogical practice, Amanda had already mastered the favorite bar so well that the rest of the staff thought they had seen this noisy, always dissatisfied young lady. As if such an unpleasant girl had never worked in their home-like friendly team. Discipline suddenly settled down in the hall. The regulars didn't turn on the pretty Amanda with bad antics at all. And if someone tried to get handsy at first, the others looked at him in such a way that he felt sick. Sebastian only hummed approvingly. EVS soon gave her summary. "Amanda's a smart one. Men can tell from a mile away that you can't lose with her. She's not rude, she doesn't sling mud, and she's not sticky. She works hard and takes care of her clients." 6 months flew by. Amanda fully mastered in the bar, deftly carried in her hands at the same time 4-liter mugs of foamy nectar. At the same time, she never familiarized herself with the guests of the establishment, clearly keeping them at a safe distance. The New Year holidays flew by like a comet across the starry sky. The year 2014 had arrived. By the beginning of February, Amanda had completed her teaching practice reports. 2 state exams were behind her, and she was admitted to the dean's office to write and then to defend her diploma. Everyone was looking forward to the Winter Olympics in Athens. The country had won the right to welcome athletes from all continents. The most avid fans bought tickets for matches and competitions in advance. Regular visitors of the favorite were looking forward to cheering for our country here in the bar. In the atmosphere of general jubilation, they shifted mugs with beer when our team will stand on the highest step of the podium, or will be sad if they give up the championship to faster and more agile, and maybe more fortunate rivals. It was impossible to watch the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games at the stadium in February 2014 without a lot of emotions and a lot of libations. Beer was flowing. Passions were running high. When the American Olympic team appeared on the platform to the track of a famous band, everyone at the tables in the bar jumped up with jubilant shouts. It seemed that no one could stay at home that night. The favorite was packed. Amanda could barely keep up with taking orders and running from the bar to the customers. At the peak of the noise and clamor, the door of the bar opened and a new, unfamiliar to the old-timers company poured in from the cold. The young, athletic-looking guys piled into the center of the bar, where a few bar stools were still empty. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief that at least their agile bartender could handle these guys on his own, and fixed a strand of her blonde hair out of the ponytail that was secured on the top of her head with a colored knitted elastic band. Eve appeared from the back room and whispered trustingly, "If I make it through tonight until the favorite closes, consider me an Olympic gold medalist too. I'm exhausted." The old cleaning lady winked at her conspiratorially. "And look at the newcomers, they don't look like neighborhood natives at all. One is more beautiful than the other." I remembered a phrase from my favorite film, "Where did such a handsome man come from?" Eva laughed and Amanda turned round to look at the handsome strangers. Her attention was immediately drawn to one of the sturdy, trim guys. He was slowly sipping beer from a tall glass with a colorful emblem on the side and watching the action on the big TV screen. Even from a distance, it was obvious that he had dark brown eyes, almost like 2 glowing coals, and a short cut of dark, almost black hair. Good, Amanda thought to herself. I've forgotten when I ever paid attention to the male gender, and I'm only turning 21 in a couple of months. With my studies and my daily waitressing job at Sebastian's, I'm going to turn into an old maid or a blue stocking without a single sign of femininity so soon. As if overhearing her thoughts, the guy suddenly turned round and looked straight at her. Without averting his gaze for a few seconds, he smiled warmly, and only then replied to the guy sitting next to him. Since the car stalled, they took it to a service station. God told us to watch the Olympic opening ceremony here. "Okay, Kevin, whatever you say," he replied. "At least I got some warmth while we waited for the tow truck. I was freezing to death." They talked some more quietly and then ordered more beer. The evening was drawing to a close, and Amanda's shift was coming to an end. It hadn't been easy, but the opening of the Athens Olympics had been worth it. Everyone was in high spirits. Amanda had forgotten all about the guy who had caught her eye for a while, but somewhere in the heavens, fate had decided otherwise. When the Athens Olympic skiing competition fell on the schedule, he showed up at their bar, the favorite, but this time alone, without his mates, taking the far table in the corner. Gesturing for her to come over, he ordered a mug of non-alcoholic beer and a plate of peanuts, croutons, and squid rings. He kept his eyes on the screen while the skiing competition was on, and as he left, he suddenly asked Amanda a question. "What time do you get off work, Amanda?" Her name was on her jacket. "I'd like to walk you out, if you don't mind." "I don't mind." The waitress, who was already quite tired at the end of the day, looked embarrassed. Now she didn't care whether she had a decent appearance for socializing with a handsome man. She was surprised that the man she had turned her feminine attention to was the one who had returned to the favorite bar. "Your shift will be over in 40 minutes, Amanda said. "I'll be waiting for you in the car out front. Take it easy and get your work done." "I'm in no hurry." They drove the 2 blocks to her house in a minute. The streets were deserted at night. Only rare streetlights and the moon in the sky slightly illuminated the even rows of brick 5-story buildings and the bench at the entrance. They were silent, as if they had water in their mouths. The guy only said deftly when he opened the car door for her. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. "I'm Kevin. I'm a ski coach. I'm supposed to be in Athens right now if it weren't for the Olympics. I'm still watching my favorite events on TV. My charges are small. Their victories are still ahead of them." We reached the flat, where Kevin had volunteered to escort her, in complete silence, like gorillas in the forest before an important mission. "I'm not asking for coffee," the man said, "although I would like a cup of this invigorating drink." "Why not?" Amanda agreed easily, having had enough of the loneliness of returning to the warmth of home after work, with only the old refrigerator humming quietly at its epicenter. And then an equally ancient television. "What a terrible moment," Amanda often said after her husband's death. "How can it be? Just yesterday a man was hugging you, whispering tender words in your ear, living side by side. Today he is gone." Back then, at the beginning of their married life, and later in between having children, Kevin and Amanda spent all their free time in the mountains waiting for the first snow, or seeing it off at the end of the season. Amanda has long since graduated from a pedagogical institute, but she never had the chance to teach school children the rules of spelling and love of literature. At the Olympic Reserve School, where her husband worked, there was a vacancy for a tutor for a younger group of hopeful kids who had come to their town from all over the country. Kevin's parents were medical epidemiologists. They went for the long dollar, hooked on the natives with all their caring hearts. Amanda sometimes joked that their eldest son, Terrence, was curly-haired only because Kevin had flown to a distant continent to see his parents and caught a local virus. Molly was just like her mother Amanda, blonde, gray-eyed with an outwardly calm and peaceful disposition. A misleading impression. In fact, she was a collector of pranks, a lover of sharp situations and adventures. The youngest, Molly, started skiing like a stumbling block. People around her joked. That girl was already born with ski boots and poles in her hands. Amanda stroked the ski equipment on the mezzanine, her eyes stung with tears again. How ornate everything had turned out then, a year ago. Marcus was born. She was back on maternity leave with him. There was a surprise, a big one, as Kevin laughed. They were walking with the pram in the park near the newsagents. Terrence and Molly lingered. They liked the plastic toys in the window. The chatty saleswoman even stretched her head out of the window, admiring their friendly family. And then she went somewhere in the inner pockets and pulled out a slightly tattered lottery ticket. "Young people, I've got a ticket here from the instant lottery. Just rub the strip and you'll see whether you've won or not. It's worth $100. Will you try your luck?" Kevin and Amanda laughed. "We don't believe in any of these lotteries. We'll buy a ticket from you. We'll bore you under the counter for a day to help you out. And these winnings are only shown in TV adverts to fool naive, ordinary people. We don't believe in such freebies." While they chatted with the newspaper and magazine saleswoman, Terrence and Molly picked out a plastic toy each, both of them very pleased with their purchase. Noisily, they rushed forwards down Park Lane. Kevin told Marcus that he couldn't choose his present yet. It was an adult lottery. "Let's wipe off the strip right here," Kevin suggested. Amanda picked up the top layer of paper with the edge of her fingernail. Faded blue numbers began to appear underneath. When she read what appeared on the piece of paper, she grinned and said only one word. "Jokers." "Airy. What's so funny about that?" Kevin reacted instantly. We won $100 million. A million doesn't smell like a million, but a number with 6 O's looks extremely strange too, Amanda answered him. Terrence and Molly had already returned to the kiosk, having run up and down the alley. The curious owner of the paper treasure peered out of the window. Have you got a cash win? Up to $100? I can give it to you right here on the spot. Yes, the number 100 is also on it, replied the bewildered Amanda. Only it's not just dollars, it's millions. Fuck you, the aunt said in surprise. I immediately thought that I should have erased the stripe on this seemingly expensive piece of paper with frayed edges. If the winnings are large, you'll have to go to the head office. In my memory, the largest sum of $25,000 was wiped off a ticket by a man. He came to me later and told me that he had been paid off. Excited by the unexpected situation, Kevin and Amanda, picking up the pram with Marcus and the older children, went home. There they took another look at the inscription on the ticket under a magnifying glass. There was no doubt about the numbers. A week later, the alpine ski enthusiasts convened a house council in Philadelphia. Amanda was appointed to preside. She had to say the last weighty word on what to spend the accidentally dropped and already safely received money. The woman thought for a while, and then she gave her verdict. Kevin, I love you very much. I'm saddened by the longing for snow-capped mountain peaks in your eyes. You've already been to a ski resort with your students this winter season. But I remember your dream to conquer the black slopes on Elbrus. You can't go further than green and blue slopes with your students. They are all beginners. Mostly, Kevin replied. A couple of rides on the red slopes in their spare time, and that's it. Adrenaline. You can't build a new passion with that. You've got a week off in a week. I won't be able to keep you company because of Marcus. Go to Elbrus with some of the guys who love skiing, Amanda suggested. At first, his wife's suggestion puzzled Kevin, but his favorite woman was right. After a serious injury 8 years ago, professional skiing in any kind of competitive sport was a thing of the past for him. At first, he was even thoroughly discouraged by the doctor's verdict. Later, he was found by the management of the Olympic Reserve School in his hometown with a proposal to switch to coaching. He still kept in close touch with his friends, the same fans of mountain slopes covered with a cap of fluffy snow. He worked with novice boys and girls in the training center. The pain from the effects of the injury was slowly wearing off. He dreamed of at least once riding on a real dashing track for extreme skiers. He was obsessed with black runs and high difficulty. Kevin was seen off on his trip by his family, then popped into the patisserie to buy their favorite cakes and have tea in the evening to celebrate the head of house's holiday. Kevin always gave so much time to his housemates that their joy for him was genuine. We should let the husband and dad go skiing once in a while too, Amanda considered. Then she vaguely remembered the day when she received a phone call from a ski base near Elbrus people saying something in Caucasian. They did not speak English well. 4 days after Kevin and his friends arrived at the base, a group of young rich people from the golden elite of society showed up. The young people went to the ski slopes drunk. When the instructor announced the danger of avalanches, they only laughed in his face. We are not afraid of anything. We went to the track and will continue to go. Today we decided to try out your pro pist. We all have been skiing for years, and you are not our boss, they said to the elderly instructor guide, a Cabardinian with many years of experience, a former sportsman. Do you even know how many people have already died near the black ski track? How many people, as reckless as you, have ended up in the permafrost, where even the corpses cannot be retrieved later? If you happen to fall to the rocky bottom? And the weather promises to worsen, he shouted when he heard their statement. But nobody listened to the words of the experienced mountain old-timer. They passed around a flask of whiskey, patted each other on the shoulder, and piled out of the wooden log cabin into the street, Kevin told me later. He and his friends, who had already finished their coffee and khachapuri at the table, savoring the aromas of freshly baked pastries, soon got up from the table. Their plans included a short warm-up on the easy green course. They had no intention of taking any risks today. In the courtyard of the ski center, everything was quiet and peaceful. A big shaggy dog was stomping near the booth, having just finished a sugar bone which the cook from the cafe had given him. Here, far from civilization, it was not like anywhere else in the Alps. Much simpler, without the frills of tourist service. It is at the foot of the two-headed giant Elbrus. The regular guests of Kabardino-Balkaria are innumerable. And here, a little further from the village of Terskal, is a place for experienced people, for their own. In an hour after breakfast, a heavy, dense snow began to fall from the gray sky that was beginning to frown and puff up from unreasonable anger. In another hour, the sky was completely covered with inky purple clouds. The Kabardinian was muttering something quietly to himself, pursing his lips in frustration. Then he couldn't stand it any longer, put on warmer clothes, and went off in the direction of the black ski track. Having gone all the way along the paths he knew only to himself, in half an hour he stopped at the very top of the point of descent. At the side of the slope I saw a flock of young men in bright red and yellow jackets. They were fiddling about near the same spot, moving away from it, then approaching it again. The Kabardinian swore again, smelling something wrong. His fears were not in vain. When he reached the woeful skiers, they began to explain to him that they were engaged in an improvised contest. We were descending in a line one after another when three guys who were traveling in front of us fell through the snow like through the ground, they said. They were just gone. I told you. I warned you not to go on the black track, even if you are drunk and in bad weather, the Kabardinian replied irritably. There are treacherous crevasses everywhere. I'll go and call the guys who ski on the green. Maybe they will help me with something, and I'll call the rescuers at the control and rescue post. They searched for the wayward trio until dark. All the next day, despite the constant threat of avalanche, to no avail. Then the rescuers canceled the expedition and told all the tourists who had found shelter at a remote ski base to descend to the foot of Mount Elbrus. It would be safer there if the acceleration of the snow mass developed at an extreme speed. Kevin couldn't find a place to stay, and then he decided to stay with the Kabardan guard. Both Jenny, the cook, and himself upstairs blamed themselves for not listening to the rich kids talking, for not stopping them when they were about to go to the black ski slope. Kevin was burning inside with a prickling cold. It seemed that it wasn't other people's boys who'd disappeared on the damn ski run, but one of his charges from the Olympic Reserve School. He couldn't find a place, rushing around the warm interior of the log cabin, grabbing his skis, his boots, his cozy warm down jacket. He had left for the mountain before dawn. No one will ever know what he was looking for, who he hoped to pull out from under the avalanche, what snow demons he was talking to. That night an avalanche came down to the foot of Elbrus. Maybe it was she who caught him with her dense snow edge, crushed him with her mass without stopping, rushing down, pinned him to the slope, and then ran further, breaking everything on her way. What dark force had dragged him upwards onto the black track? The old Kabardian was never able to explain to Amanda, who came to collect her husband's body. Kevin was found 3 hours after dawn. Jenny, the cook, was too shy to look in his room and wake him for breakfast. The bed in the room was already cold. Kevin was lying in a fetal position with his arms and legs oddly crossed and tucked up against his stomach near the supposed edges of the cleft. The medical examiner, after the autopsy, wrote a report that his heart had stopped. Amanda, after reading this document, immediately recalled the words of Friedrich Nietzsche. If you stare at the abyss for a long time, the abyss also stares at you. It seemed to her all the time afterwards that the last hours of Kevin's life had been terrible. Just like that, he had magically appeared in her life unobtrusively, without further words or explanations, abruptly and quickly. He'd also left her life without saying goodbye, without explaining anything, without a final look in her eyes. "You're not very good at cleaning the mezzanine," Mother Amanda said to herself. Time to feed the children and put them to bed. Marcus wasn't cranky today, thankfully. Kevin and Amanda's youngest son was about to turn 2. She'd recently found an activity that fascinated him so much that he could sit quietly for hours without a peep. The secret was simple. She would place a pair of her cleanly washed trainers in front of him. She would pull the lace out of one of them and leave it in the other. They say that children at 2 years old are still very young, that they don't understand the subtleties. But Marcus was eager to put the lace into the trainer and could sit with this toy for hours on end. The most interesting thing was that as a result of his diligence, the shoelace that had been inserted into the shoe by his hands looked much neater than the other shoelace that had not been inserted by him. Believe it or not. For the trio's dinner, Amanda fed pancakes with cottage cheese, tea with ice cream and jam. Amanda told everyone to brush their teeth before bed and head for bed. Parents, who had recently started first grade, and Molly, who was used to getting up early for kindergarten, were already accustomed to discipline. Marcus, the quiet one, only fell asleep after reading a story. Amanda had accustomed him to it herself. After that winnings almost unspent by Kevin, they lived on child allowances for the time being. The rest of the gift of fate was spent on lessons in Russian language and literature. Amanda was not a bad tutor for unhelpful pupils, but she couldn't take on many students. A good help could be the rent of Kevin's one-room flat, the renovation of which the family had long called a long construction project. All the years of living together with her husband Amanda never allowed him to sell the property. Before we know it, Terrence will be older and looking for a bride, she joked. All we need to do is freshen up your flat, change its bachelor atmosphere for a more cozy one. We'll have a family nest ready for our handsome Terrence. He's growing by leaps and bounds. Sell both my flat and Kevin's and get something newer and bigger. For some reason, Amanda wasn't feeling well either. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain. But they had lived in an old 5-story building on the outskirts of the city for 7 years of their marriage. Once again, there was no money to continue renovating Kevin's house. The money melted away inexorably. The question of placing Marcus in an institution was again urgent. But here was the problem. The doctors said that he could not go to a kindergarten. Marcus was often ill with acute respiratory diseases and acute respiratory infections. If he could go to daycare regularly, he'd have to be 5 years old. If Kevin were here, he'd think of something. Amanda thought bitterly. In the meantime, she dutifully picked up Marcus's favorite book to reread his favorite fairy tale to her son for the 100th time. It was his all-time favorite book. Finally put the entire junior guard to bed. It was almost midnight on the clock. Amanda was disappointed to find that there was no bread or milk in the house. Even porridge for breakfast would be difficult to boil. Amanda tiptoed down the corridor, pulled on her coat and shoes, grabbed her bag and ran to the shop. It was a good thing they'd recently opened a convenience store right at the end of their house, where they always had dairy products and fresh baked goods. The golden autumn outside the window rustled the fallen leaves underfoot. The current janitors were not as diligent as Joyce. In her day, she had collected leaves into large bags reluctantly, tentatively. Burning leaves was forbidden by the sanitary control. So the bags first stood along the walls of the house, and then once a week they were taken somewhere by a rubbish truck. Now there was a string of them lined up next to the dark brickwork. Amanda thought there was a shadow moving at the epicenter. "Kitty, kitty, kitty, kitty," she called, just in case, as she often fed stray cats. She even promised her children that one day they would have a pet. "Hey, I'm going to the shop. Can I buy you some sausages? Show your mustache and stripes." Amanda almost fainted in surprise at the sound of the ringing voice. "Thank you, of course. Sausage is good when you're hungry, but I like a big, juicy wiener, even if there's no place to boil them." "Who are you?" a woman called out. "Stranger, you'll be surprised, but I'd really like to know who I am," replied a girl of small stature with 2 braided pigtails and eyes that were clearly not those of a child. "Why do you walk alone at night?" "It's not safe to be out here in the suburbs alone at night." "I was shopping in the supermarket," the strange woman replied artlessly. "I didn't manage to steal anything from the most vigilant guard. He's on shift today." "Are you a thief?" Amanda was once again surprised. Not the most promising of jobs, I must say. "It happens very rarely, just small things. If you don't manage to earn something honestly one day." "Where do you live, and with whom?" Amanda asked. She was shocked by the answer. "Since I was found on the street, I've been living with the homeless in a house being prepared for demolition near the city station. The police know about our community, but for some reason they don't touch us. Maybe they're fine with us being there for a little while under their watch. I have amnesia. We have an old doctor there who's also homeless. She's the one who diagnosed me with it. She's the one who fixed me after I got hit on the head from behind. I don't know who attacked me. I don't remember my name or where I lived before." The girl's trusting confession touched something in Amanda's soul. She immediately asked herself a question. What would Kevin do in her place now? She knew the answer. He would try to do something to help the unfortunate victim of circumstances. Somehow, Amanda was sure that there was no lie in the words of the stranger of the night. They entered the flat quietly. The children were sleeping peacefully. Only the night light in the hall cast faint glints of light on the walls. "They call me Agnes among the homeless, because I seem to be a foundling with that name. Will you call me that too, since you've decided to invite me to visit? And don't think I'm being cheeky. Can I take a shower at your place? I've always felt uncomfortable washing in our half-barrack behind a screen fetch water from the pump around the corner, heated up on the electric cooker, for which we always get beaten up by the police. What's all this washing?" Amanda brought a large terry towel from the bedroom, gave me some pajamas from her stock, showed me how to use the gas heater. There was not a shadow of doubt in her mind that Agnes would want to steal something from them, take advantage of her trust and deceive her. After her shower, she went to the kitchen, where Amanda had already made her tea with milk and a sandwich with doctor's sausage, which her children loved so much. In the light of the orange lamp, the landlady changed her mind once more. Agnes looked even older when she came out of the hot water, with her hair loose around her shoulders and a deep look in her marsh-colored eyes. Sleep came to both of them. Even though Amanda had to get up at 7 to take her son to school and her daughter to kindergarten, she was curious. She wanted to ask the girl if she remembered anything about her mysterious past. Madeline stretched out sweetly in bed like a graceful kitten. Freedom of movement, freedom of action, freedom to call and text her lover's mobile phone. There was no longer that nasty Nicole standing between them. Ugh. I had to name my daughter so intricately for that oligarch. She is Nicolette Stevenson, favored daughter, wife of a business partner, a successful young woman. So where is she now? I'm looking for her in the field. It was a good idea of hers to get that upstart out of the way. She and her beloved from the school desk made eyes at each other. She with simple dreams, with dreams of a prince on a white horse. He's the son of a successful businessman, Harry. Who in town doesn't know this famous corporation of 2 long-time associates of Stevenson and the father of her sweet boy? How upset she was when Eric was sent to study in London at some economics academy. They danced so languidly and tenderly at graduation, the envy of all their classmates. Rumors were flying around the school that they were a couple. And then there's this surprise with this study abroad thing. Nicole was not wasting time with her studies at that moment either. The 2 avid business partners owned shopping malls, restaurants, and supermarkets around the city. Yes, they don't have London, New York, or even major cities here. It's just an average-sized town. But by local standards, the fortunes of the owners of all this wealth are enormous. That kind of big business has to go into safe hands. So Nicole, as everyone around her called her, went to university after school, graduated from the Department of Food Experts. She learned to determine the quality of sausage, cheese, chocolate, and all other products almost unmistakably by their appearance. Eric returned from London a serious, thoughtful young man. Harry was already rubbing his hands together in anticipation that he would be able to hand over the business to his rightful heir in a little while. Stevenson, Nicole's father, was older than his age. Despite the opportunity to receive any treatment in the best clinics in the world, with health and physical capabilities increasingly gave up. In every possible way joined the business to his daughter, who turned out to be a clever and wise assistant. Once, when Eric was still studying in the UK, the two men had a serious conversation. "Harry, mate, you and I have known each other for so many years. In fact, we trust each other. What would you think of my modest plans for my son and your daughter? It would make a handsome couple. We'd pool our capital for future grandchildren." "Yes, Mr. Harry, given the 17-year age difference. I never called my partner by name. I'll be glad to see our offspring work out to our mutual satisfaction. I think they'll get to know each other. They're not the first, they're not the last, they're the ones who seal the business with marital ties. I think that marriage in our commercial times is better to conclude with people of their own circle, so that then unnecessary surprises did not arise. I agree with your idea." The two men had not forgotten when Eric had returned to his hometown, encouraged by his academic success. The two families, and the men had already discussed their plans with their wives and received full approval, began to organize picnics, parties, receptions with the obligatory condition the presence of the whole family. So willy-nilly Nicole and Eric had to cross paths all the time. The young people themselves were not stupid either. Far-reaching ideas of their parents with their minds approved. Of course, they did not feel great and bright love for each other. But love is not required for a marriage of convenience. The main thing was that they sympathized with each other, did not experience obvious dislike, were not negatively disposed when communicating close. The level of intelligence and development, similar interests did the trick. To begin with, they went to lunch a couple of times in a restaurant, to a fashion exhibition and a touring performance of the Capitol's theater. A couple of months later, Eric invited Nicole to a romantic dinner, where he made her a marriage proposal, handed her a stylish ring in a dainty velvet box, thick burgundy color. We drank to the possible future marital happiness. They decided on the date of the reception in honor of the official announcement of the engagement. Nicole allowed herself a couple of glasses of wine. Eric downed 200 grams of whiskey for courage, then made up his mind. "Nicole, I'm sorry to ask, but I'd like to know. Have you had experience with men before?" Nicole, not the least bit embarrassed, simply answered, "I had a 2-year student affair with a guy from a parallel group. We were in our 20s, who at that age only reads poetry and looks at the moon. I wasn't a monk in England either, having been with a student from another college for 3 years. We both knew it was a no-strings-attached affair. She's an educated, well-read person, a loyal mate. But we parted without tears or regrets. Both of us knew from the beginning that it was bound to happen at some point." After this frank conversation, it somehow happened by itself that at Nicole's flat, she had already been living separately from her parents for 2 years. Eric looked into her eyes questioningly. Nicole nodded. Both understood without words. There was a whole life ahead of them. They had to see if they were right for each other. This night for the two of them didn't become something beyond the clouds, fabulously magical. Mutual sympathy, youth, easy interest helped. Nicole had thought at the time that it could be like that. What Eric thought, no one ever knew. But he wasn't particularly disappointed either. The reception in honor of the engagement of the two heirs took place. They were both the only children in the family. The reception was organized at the highest level in the finest country restaurant. Hundreds of guests, the glitter of diamonds and emeralds on the ladies, expensive suits and watches on their beaux, representatives of the press of all stripes from the city multi-circulation to the tabloids. Madeline sat in the beauty parlor and was bored. The queue for hairstyling was still not coming up. She and the girls had gathered at a cafe in the city center to impress everyone with her beauty. Over the years, Eric had become even more flamboyant. A little femme fatale. Married boring, she said. Why the verdict? Yes, the husband turned out to be a promising scientist, but such a nerd. In the shower sits with his snowflakes, all day long digging in old manuscripts. Where is it seen that in the age of the internet, a man collects information from ancient manuscripts? A doll like me should be brought out regularly, so that other men would be envious. And he kept saying, "Darling, you'll soon be proud of your new surname. On me will fall international recognition and fabulous royalties." Madeline would not last a month with this plan. But he was surprisingly handsome and very good in bed. True, on the marital bed he rarely appeared. He preferred to sit in libraries and then at a desk until midnight. Some academy had given him a personal grant for all expenses, so he was not deprived of his daily bread. He had enough to live on with his young wife. Not luxurious, but not poor either. Madeline dreamed of an endless and full-flowing stream of money, so that she could cling to it with greedy hands and lips when she wanted to drink wealth. To hold his material affirmations in her lap, her hands with long nails with a perfect manicure. She ran away from her scholarly husband as soon as she met a brash young entrepreneur at a hen party, socking away money left and right in a nightclub. Her husband had just rushed off to the library of a neighboring town. There's something interesting picked up for him, and there he stayed the night. She agreed to accompany the visiting businessman to his hotel room. The night went terribly, but she did not go home empty-handed after the meeting. Generous, inexperienced lover gave her such a sum for a couple of hours of dialogue which her husband did not give her for 6 months for expenses. Made it clear that the encounter was casual. There would be no sequel. Madeline thought hard. She needs to find the chosen one, so that as a man was not much worse than her current husband, and in the funds are not constrained and not greedy, would be happy to cherish the woman she loved. It would be better, undoubtedly, that she received the status of his lawful wife. But that would still have to be worked on thoroughly. In the pile of magazines on the nightstand in the beauty parlor, something on the cover of one of them looked painfully familiar to her. She grabbed an edition of the local yellow press and laughed out loud for the whole room. "Look, the Golden Carp is back from London," she whispered fervently in her friend's ear. And he had found himself some bride in the local aristocratic beau monde, all intellectual with glasses. How was it in the famous comedy? "If she gives me one, I'll take her without a hitch, but first, Maggie, I have to show my first love in front of my eyes to see what a woman with a capital letter should look like." Madeline's devious plans were not to be realized at once. Harry and Grant decided that it would be a good idea if their children went on not one trip like a honeymoon, but 2. First, they would go to the Dominican Republic with its tropical delights, dive into the turquoise Atlantic Ocean. They will walk by hand on velvet white sands, admire the local flora and fauna. At the same time, they will get used to the idea that immediately after their return, a big lavish wedding will be held in the city. The position obliges. After the marriage ceremony, the newlyweds will go to more civilized Europe for a couple of months to finally consolidate their feelings in the formed marriage union. They can manage without the heirs to the big kingdom for the time being. In Grant's office 5 years ago, a promising young specialist had appeared, and the elderly businessman had been delighted with him ever since. Grant was brilliantly educated, had received a red diploma in Washington, and was a native of their city. He refused to pursue a career in the capital for the reason that his elderly parents lived at home. They already required constant supervision. They themselves did not cope well even with household chores. A late child is the one and only. His father and mother still found the strength to help him graduate from the Lyceum, to get an education in Washington. And then they gave up. They sat in front of the TV all day long. Almost stopped going outside. Grant was recommended by Harry, an old university friend of his. "He's a rare bloke. He's a great personal assistant," he said. "Yes, we were going to leave the running of the holding company in the hands of our children," said Harry. "I have other plans. One can't interfere with the other. No one's suggesting that you make him CEO of the whole company. Let him hang around with you for a while and then we'll see." And he was right. The owners of the holding company had long trusted their deputy general director. Grant received this position from them a year ago. While the children were traveling, getting used to the new family life after the wedding, Grant was pulling all the managerial burdens and coped with them perfectly. Madeline was the only one who wasn't bored. While the newlyweds were out of town, she perfected her appearance again and again. The gossip of the world reported that Eric and Nicole's marriage had been officially registered after all. But when could such a trifling obstacle stop her? Or would this man be her husband? We'd just have to wait. The young people returned from Europe tanned and rested. Both were eager to get back to work as soon as possible. Relations between them were even reminiscent of mates. They were not in a hurry to have a child. They decided to delay this important matter. Madeline prepared the meeting with Eric as a strategic operation. She found out where the young businessman goes to lunch on weekdays, wore her most stylish outfit, knowing perfectly well that in it, and with fashionable, almost imperceptible makeup, she is irresistible. The altercation with the waitress attracted the attention of the entire catering establishment. At the moment when Eric had just sat down at one of the tables, Madeline had played the whole thing out. She gave the waitress a subtle nudge under her arm, and a cup of chocolate flew onto Madeline's snow-white suit. "What have you done?" she exclaimed. "Girl, do you know how much such a jacket from the latest collection can cost? You can't pay for it in a year with your meager salary." Eric involuntarily turned his head in the direction of the frightening lady and marveled how marvelously beautiful she was. Madeline also looked in his direction, immediately stopped bringing up the waitress, and smiled welcomingly. "Eric, are you?" she asked. A minute later, they were already sitting at the same table. Eric was amazed at the change that had taken place with his high school sweetheart. Groomed, regal, alluring, not like his quiet, always even-tempered, ordinary wife. Madeline had a fire in her that promised unearthly pleasure. "And Eric fell for me," the money hunter thought predatorily. "I've got to take this chance and squeeze him. But first, a little tease." "Oh, Eric, I'd love to meet you, but I'm in a hurry," said Madeline. "I have an appointment, and I have to go home and change. My suit is hopelessly ruined." "A little thing like that isn't worth your trouble," Madeline said. "Eric, where can I buy one just like it? Let's meet tomorrow and fix this mistake of the negligent waitress." The golden carp has taken the bait, Madeline decided in no uncertain terms. Eric was also burning with impatience, waiting for the next meeting with Madeline. In Eric's soul, conscience didn't even squeak. Grant liked Harry's daughter, and now his son's wife. He couldn't help it. No, that definition would not even be correct. Was he in love, or was it her? Nicole had long ago and hopelessly. This young woman walked past him like he was nothing. A polite hello when she met him, and immediately forgot he existed. With the gaze of a loving man, Grant noted that there was no real warmth between Nicole and Eric. Dry cultural politeness, a tribute to the idea of keeping and growing the business. That was where it ended. Once, a long time ago, before all the marital processes and even the engagement, Grant had even had the impulse to open up to Nicole, to tell her how he felt. But it was on that day that he had accidentally witnessed a conversation between Harry and Terrence's families. Harry said, Can you imagine mate Terrence, the daughter of one of our competitors, married some penniless bloke, and the father didn't even bat an eye? Let her choose with her heart. What kind of sincere feelings can there be in our business? I think that with such views on life, a solid business will never be built. Hearing this rant, Grant immediately changed his mind about something to say to Nicole. He loved her silently to himself, not paying attention to other girls. Although with his masculine appearance, the entire female cohort of the team cast explosive glances at him. Thank God, at least his heart's secret no one guessed. There was chatter that his heart was broken by some hottie from New York. Eric and Madeline were drowning in an ocean of unearthly passion. In fact, Madeline herself did not throw herself into the maelstrom of all these sentimental tricks. She had calculated everything. Eric never came to a date without an expensive gift. Her entire flat was now littered with luxurious bouquets of flowers. There were incredibly expensive birthday outfits in her wardrobe, a small, sleek car of astronomical value, and even with technical tuning for the 8th of March, a stunningly beautiful canvas from Somalia. Eric was a generous lover, earned an excellent income, and had a personal bank account, with the contents of which his father had no interest. Let the boy have some funds for pocket money. Somehow, once again, Madeline was lazily bored. She ran through the television channels and came across an very old cartoon film called Last Year's Snow Falling. Its busy character kept moving through space with the phrase, "It's going to be a bit small." At that moment, Madeline acutely realized that she didn't want to remain in the role of the second woman in Eric's life. After all, her partner never stayed overnight at her place anyway, or went to Nicole's place in the next fancy hotel, and she even suspected that he never did his marital duty at home. Nicole lived in complete ignorance. Her husband at work, at corporate receptions, at city social gatherings was always there, as he should be. And how he spent his time in other hours, she did not care at all. Inside Nicole lived a certain mystery. After returning from Europe, already being the legal wife of Harry Jr., the trip to Miami was extremely romantic. There was only one thing that frustrated Eric. Madeline did not want to spend time in bed. He was drawn to a Cuban restaurant or a trendy new chain cafe where the seafood was amazing. Even lavish shopping at the local mall hadn't made her more amenable. The man was puzzled by this behavior of hers, reeking of either chill or indifference. By nightfall, after a lavish dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the resort, Madeline hardly showed up and got into bed with him side by side, but she wouldn't let him near her. She started a conversation. "Eric, don't you think it's time for us to make up our minds about our relationship? I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as your second lover." "Girl, you know what our marriage to Nicole is based on. Divorce is impossible. We're the management center of a huge holding company. If it doesn't hold together, it's going to crack. There'll be no more opportunities to spoil you like this." "But what about me?" Eric asked angrily, not expecting such a blatant refusal at once. "The eternal number 2 in the shadow of your Nicole. That's not going to happen." That night, for the first time, Eric was never allowed to see the body. He flew home angry. Madeline, sitting next to him, kept her mask of hurt and offense on her face. They both took separate taxis home. A week after that ill-fated trip to Miami, Madeline had a new plan in her head. If Nicole couldn't be moved, she had to be wiped off the face of the earth. She did not even care about the fact that such a plan smells of crime. Madeline was still in a furious rage. Eric decided to take time out and give his precious mistress time to calm down and accept his arguments wisely. That's why it didn't even occur to him to be suspicious when his wife disappeared without returning from work one evening. Upon learning that Nicole, whom he loved devotedly, had disappeared, Grant was at a loss for words and decided to conduct his own investigation. It had long seemed to him that Eric had been acting extremely strange in recent months. telling his father and his partner that he would be late in the office with the documents that had accumulated like a snowball, and then mysteriously disappearing as soon as the two partners went home. Unable to resist, he decides to play a homegrown private investigator, to follow Eric, who, once outside the walls of the holding company, was not really hiding. Grant learned about the fact that he had a mistress after a couple of days. Moreover, following the heir to the family turned into an obsession for Grant. He recorded the facts of Eric's adultery with pedantry and meticulousness, expensive spending on gifts, trips to restaurants, trips to country clubs, dates in secluded hotels. He was eager to build up a collection of pictures, and he'd taken plenty of shots of Eric and Madeline from different angles, and get all that dirt in front of their families. The only thing stopping him was that he didn't know the terms of the marriage. What was disconcerting was that Nicole remained completely unperturbed. Meeting her alone in the lift, he tried to understand her inner state. He even scolded himself later for keeping an eye on her, trying to see through her like an X-ray. She was absolutely as calm as usual. She did not resemble a woman suffering from her husband's treacherous betrayal. The last straw in Grant's patience with Eric's low behavior was Nicole's disappearance. Everyone in the office had seen the young woman take her bag in the evening and hurry to the exit to the car park, get into her car and drive away. Nicole didn't show up at home that day. Eric didn't sound the alarm until the next day. He had gone out with Madeline the night his wife disappeared. Mistress again turned into a wax pussycat, faithfully looked into her eyes and said that she understood everything and agreed to everything, as long as the beloved was near. The day after the mysterious disappearance of her daughter, Joyce was no laughing matter. She was madly in love with Nicole, though she tried not to show it to anyone. The entire security team of the holding company had been alerted, and the police had joined in. Harry had enlisted the help of some private investigators he knew, to no avail. All the city and regional hospitals and morgues had already been checked. Joyce's men with Nicole's picture had looked at all the unidentified female corpses. A week later, Nicole's car was found near a park on a short walk with her bag lying orphaned in the back seat. To everyone's surprise, no barbarity had been committed to the property. Harry was going crazy, and Grant was tossing and turning between his duty to the chief and his inner doubts, all the while asking himself, how am I going to show Joyce a picture of her son-in-law with his mistress? It would lead to a quarrel between long-standing business partners, a split of a huge company, a misunderstanding between two businessmen in whose hands many of the city's commercial arteries were connected. Still, Grant made up his mind. He came to the boss's office on woozy legs, not because he realized he was likely to lose his place in the holding company. He didn't care as long as Nicole was found, as long as she was alive and well. He knocked firmly on the door. He saw at once that Joyce had lost a great deal of color in the last few days, the Earth's fifth complexion, the fallen, unhappy eyes. What do you want, Grant? I haven't much time for work at the moment, she said. I think you ought to see this, Mistress Joyce, Grant said. He fanning the table with all the pictures he'd taken of Eric's movements. The businesswoman took the dirt on her son-in-law on her hands and went through the photos one by one, becoming more gloomy than ever. I have a feeling that Nicole's disappearance has something to do with this woman, Grant added. Why were you guys doing all this snooping? Digging up your bosses, wanting to dig up something exclusive and ruin our reputation? I love your daughter, Mrs. Joyce. I wasn't digging and digging. I just want her to be happy. Eric's behavior had been suspicious to me for some time, so I rushed to find out what's going on. Can you fire me now? Why didn't you come to me earlier with all this nastiness? Nicole seemed very serene to me. I didn't see fit to disturb her peace. Joyce glared at Grant once more, then pressed the secretary's call button. Send the head of security to me and tell Mr. Harry I'd like to see him in my office. Grant was taken aback. In the past, the younger Joyce had always gone to the partner herself when she had questions. Yes, and all corporate meetings were always held in the boardroom next to Harry's office. "You're free to go, Grant. I'll let you know how I feel about your outside initiatives," Joyce said. The conversation between the two oldest partners was heavy. But first, Joyce showed Harry all the photos Grant had taken. Without saying where she had got the material from, she asked directly, "Did you know your son was having an affair with his mistress?" "No, I didn't know that," Harry replied. "If I had known, I would have tried to stop it." The head of security knocked on the door. The men concentrated on working out a plan to find Nicole due to the newly discovered circumstances. Madeline was nonchalantly drinking coffee and chatting with a friend on the phone when someone knocked on her flat door. She stretched sweetly, pulled up the hem of her silk dressing gown, and asked coquettishly, "Honey, is this your idea of a joke? You have a key, don't you?" "Open up, Madeline. Eric sent us to see you," came the reply. The woman opened the door immediately. Two big guys, either from the military or from the sporting world, poured into the flat. "Where's Nicole?" One of them asked sharply. "We warn you that the next person who knocks on your door will be the police." Madeline flapped her eyelashes indignantly. "I don't know who Nicole is. There must be some mistake." The second of the uninvited guests dumped photos on the coffee table in front of her. "We'll still prove that you had something to do with her disappearance. And then you'll be facing a much more serious criminal offense than you are now." In a moment, the beautiful Madeline, hiding her face in horror, turned into a pitiful semblance of a femme fatale. She hurried off in a confused hurry. "I only asked the boys at the bar to scare her. And those idiots overdid it, hit her on the head from behind with something heavy. When I gave them the money for the work, they said they were confused, took her under their arms to the waiting room at the railway station and sat her on a free chair. She didn't lose consciousness after the injury, but she became lethargic and strange. They thought it would be a good thing and tried to disappear as quickly as possible." The bloke showed her the phone they'd recorded the conversation and her confession on. "You'd better go to the police yourself, as a customer. If Nicole's father takes you in, things will be much worse," they said firmly. Further searches became easier. The security service of the holding company turned the whole station upside down and came to the lair of the bums. When they saw Agnes's photo, they told everything they knew without refusal. Yeah, they found one at the station, dragged her in. Rose's doctor nursed her back to health, treated her as best she could. Only she never remembered who she was. Then they all taught the new girl a trade, how not to disappear in the big city. Clothes were taken. Expensive ones were lost and sold at the clothing market. Watches and jewelry went there too. Agnes didn't have her phone with her. Apparently the people who hit her on the head took the expensive toy. A few days ago, she didn't return from a night out in the field where she used to work part-time. So, she was picking weighed fruit and vegetables in the back of supermarkets. It's a temp job. If you look decent, they can trust you. The entire security service of the holding company went to all the places where homeless people sometimes try to earn a little bit of honest money. In 2 places, Nicole was immediately recognized, and in one shop, the checkout lady said, "I know this girl. She's always so polite and cultured. She often buys groceries from us. Sometimes she comes alone, sometimes with an older woman or with her younger brothers and sisters." The servicemen were surprised. "Maybe it's not our Nicole. They all live in that 5-story building. But we can't name the flat." "You can ask the grandmothers in the courtyard," the cashier told them. Amanda couldn't be happy that one dark autumn night she met Agnes in the courtyard. She was a golden assistant, clearly well-educated and well-read. She found an excellent rapport with the children, who listened to all her stories with their mouths open. Marcus was hugging Agnes by the side of her leg and would not let her go. Amanda could now safely leave the house to study with the students. The school year was gaining momentum, and many students were lagging behind in Russian language and literature. There was no shortage of clients. Amanda went to the supermarket to buy some cakes. They would have a sweet party tonight with Agnes and the children to watch some interesting film. The cashier at the exit looked at her strangely, as if she wanted to say something, but then remained silent. Amanda thought, "My mascara must have smeared when I rubbed my eye with my fist. Well, the house is just around the corner. And there's a mirror." The drive to their entrance was blocked by a cortege of expensive cars. All elite foreign cars, big with shiny pearlescent sides. Men in strict suits, white shirts, and ties stood near the cars. One of them was obviously very nervous. Grant was asking to ride with security to where Nicole was presumably now, so pitifully that the stern businessman McDowell's heart trembled. "Go ahead. But to me they're without any tricks," he said. It had recently occurred to Harry that they had been wrong to strategize a marriage of convenience between the children of two high-ranking families. Eric, after his affair with Madeline had been discovered, had rushed to follow new trails, and lingered under the police station where his mistress was in custody. Grant, on the other hand, wouldn't go home until security brought new tidings to the chief in the evenings about how the search for Nicole was progressing. You can't command the heart to love. It's not subject to human will, he thought. Amanda walked up to her flat as if through a line, but stopped when she heard her neighbor Chloe's voice. "Oh, there she is herself. Is it in her house now, the girl you're looking for? Is that who all those expensive Jeeps with tinted windows are after? I knew Agnes was a tricky girl. What an entourage." She turned to the men. "I'll take one of you with me. You're going to scare the children with this team? Shall I go?" The handsome man, who seemed to be the most nervous, stepped forward. The head of security grinned. "Well, go on, Mr. Deputy General Manager. Maybe you'll be of more use." Agnes opened the door and saw a strange man behind Amanda. He rushed towards her, grabbed her in his arms. "Oh my God, Nicole, are you alive? It's so good to see you. We all went crazy when you disappeared." A click in my head, a brief flash, a silver lift with a stylish design. Two people entered the office, a man and a woman. And the woman felt so good to have this man around. That's what Grandma Rose used to say back at the homeless shelter. Your memory is like lightning flying. It will come back, baby. You just need strong emotions and it will serve you well again. Away with doubt. Nicole remembered who she was, how she'd parked her car outside a kiosk to buy a bottle of cool mineral water, how someone had approached quietly from behind, as if sneaking around, and then pain and failure. Nicole stepped towards Grant and put her arms around his strong, powerful shoulders. "It's good to see you too, Grant. It's really good to see you." Since the mysterious story of Nicole's disappearance, there have been abrupt changes in the city's richest holding company. Mr. Harry, who had been very hard hit by recent events, had completely handed over the reins of the company to his partner, Mr. McDowell. He even sold his shareholding to him. They say it's undervalued, as compensation for moral hazard. The rich don't get it. "Uncle, will you finish your meal without thinking?" Vincent fed the little girl, and when there was a knock on the door. The sun was scorching, and the July heat was melting the asphalt. Even in the car, the smell of bitumen lingered. Vincent tolerated the odor for a while, but when invisible cats began to scratch at his throat like stone, he closed the window. But that only made things worse, because there was no room to breathe. The man cursed the weather out loud, and at the same time he cursed himself. But how long would this scorcher last? It seemed that the heavenly office had decided to wipe out the population of our planet with heat. "Well, I did a good job, too," he said to himself. "One should strike while the iron is hot." And what if we fail again, like last time? All the time I'd wasted looking for it, and I'd gotten nothing. Vincent wasn't embarrassed by the fact that he'd combined two expressions into one. In general, he liked to experiment in this area, and often amused his colleagues with his ingenious expressions. The thought of work was always a positive one. No, Vincent was not a workaholic, nor did he intend to burn out one day. The secret of his special attitude to his professional duties lay in two key points: a good salary and a close-knit team of men. More than once, Vincent found himself thinking that he was fabulously lucky, despite certain circumstances in his personal life. After all, not every man his age has an apartment, a car, and a good job. The only trouble spot was the bachelor life. He has long wanted to start a family, necessarily with several children. But unfortunately, he has not yet met a girl who would share his aspirations. A dazzling red Ferrari sped past, and a wave of air blew in through the window, which Vincent opened again as he gasped for air. What a lot of rich people there are. He commented on another example of road rage. Do they think they're allowed to do anything? Vincent had nothing against the children of the rich, but he thought that even they should not forget the mortality of human existence. Vincent had learned these simple truths from early childhood, though he did not like to remember that period of his own life. It was a good 3 hours' drive to the provincial town of Goldfields, the last point on his itinerary. Toward noon, the clouds covered the hot sun, and it was easier to breathe. Vincent opened the window fully and enjoyed the cool breeze. A picture from the distant past immediately came to mind. How he'd stood in the courtyard with his eyes closed, waiting in horror to see what would happen to him next. Vincent had been unlucky in his birthplace or his parents, but he remembered little of his early years. The boy had existed in the full sense of the word, not lived. Along with him suffered a little sister, whose name he could not remember. His mother's face the memory did not want to show either. When he strained hard, trying to get to the farthest corners of this vault, two blurred spots surfaced from oblivion. The second image belonged to his stepfather, but their voices were distinct. Greg, I had another bottle in my stash. Did you steal it? Is he going to take it out on me? Greg asked his son. Maybe he stashed it. Look at the way he's looking, the wolf boy. Vincent remembered the scene well. His stepfather rose from the table and moved toward him. Vincent, Uncle Greg is telling the truth. Did you take the lemonade bottle? Tell me where you hid it, or your mommy will die, Greg said with a laugh. What's not good? Why are you scaring me? In front of a boy of 3 years of life, spank him properly. He'll tell you even what he doesn't know. Encouraged by the man, the mother hovered over the child. Vincent, said the man tiredly, I'm very scared. And he cried out, Mommy, don't hit me, please. I didn't drink your lemonade. Uncle Greg added frankly with this scene. As the situation reached its peak, he peacefully said the whole of Alabama is going to back off from the fight. Kid. He's the one who's going to shit his pants out of fear right now. Had nothing to do with it. Come closer to me and I'll show you a trick, said the man. With an imperceptible movement, he pulled a bottle from his sleeve, and to the enthusiastic shouts of his mother. Wow, Greg, you're a fucking magician. I almost punished the kid. Look, he's still shaking with fear. He'll be laughing in a minute. Right, Vincent? Uncle Greg first showed the boy his empty palm, then clenched his hand into a fist and said, You beast. We woke up by the river, and you're in the morgue, you creep. The stepfather opened his palm again, and the boy saw on it 2 caramels behind Mussolini wrappers. Hold on tight while Uncle Greg is kind and called his little sister to visit. When his stepfather was sober, he sometimes showed Vincent card tricks. The 6-year-old boy was mesmerized by the man's deft hands, but he never managed to figure out the secret of the trick. They taught me that in the zone. They're smart people there, kid, even Ph.D.S. Uncle Greg said in a satisfied tone. Vincent vividly remembered that tragic day when he and his little sister had run away from their mother's drunken company. There had been a lot of strangers in the house. Uncle Greg was very angry and ordered, "Sticky children, go away somewhere. Their own freaks do not give rest, all the time tangled underfoot, and the girl in addition still yells without end." The mother was still in an adequate state and started to object. "They don't bother anyone. They sit quietly in the kitchen, playing. And where am I going to take the kids? Let them go to their grandmother. And if I send them to that snake under the hood, she'll report me to the guardianship office." "What, Mary? Am I going to get my parental rights revoked? That's a disaster." "I'm sorry, but you're as much of a mother as I am a Chinese tea leaf picker. They can take away your parental rights, but you'll be completely free." "What am I going to live on? Have you thought about that? I'm on single mom's allowance for both of them. There's not much hope for you, Greg, because today you're here and tomorrow you'll be back in the slammer." The man jumped up and went at his mother with his fists. "You want me to shut you up for good?" Vincent heard every last word, but understood nothing. He still didn't understand what had made him grab his little sister in his arms and run away from the house, where another scandal was brewing. Perhaps at the critical moment he triggered an innate instinct which is called intuition. But the grandmother and her acquaintances called it a miracle. When the woman saw her grandchildren on the doorstep, she proclaimed, "Again, these lousy drunks are having fun with bread. They've gone completely off the rails. They don't think about their children. It's time to put an end to this mess. Tomorrow I'll go to the guardianship office. Even in an orphanage, the kids will be better off than with a mom like that. Even though she's my daughter, I can't stand it anymore." All these claims grandmother expressed in one breath. Tired from the emotional shock, Vincent listened to her, afraid to move. If he disobeyed her, she might throw them out on the street. But Amelie, despite her harsh nature, loved and pitied her grandchildren. She washed them, then fed them and put them to bed. But their sleep didn't last long because they heard shouting outside. Then there was a loud knock on the window. "Amelie, get up. There seems to be a fire in the cul-de-sac. Didn't your prisoners set Pompeii on fire?" Grandmother jumped up and threw her coat over her nightgown. She ran out of the house with her head uncovered, saying, "Vincent, you watch your little sister. I'll run and see what's wrong." Grandma was gone for a long time, and Vincent fell asleep again. Here is the edited text with the names changed to American names. The man jumped up and moved at his mother with his fists. "It's up to you. Do you want me to shut you up for good?" Vincent heard every last word, but understood nothing. He still didn't understand what had made him grab his little sister in his arms and run away from the house, where another scandal was brewing. Perhaps at the critical moment he triggered an innate instinct, which is called intuition. But the grandmother and her acquaintances called it a miracle. When the woman saw her grandchildren on the doorstep, she proclaimed, "Again, these lousy drunks are having fun with bread. They've gone completely off the rails. They don't think about their children. It's time to put an end to this mess. Tomorrow I'll go to the guardianship office. Even in an orphanage, the kids will be better off than with a mom like that. Even though she's my daughter, I can't stand it anymore." All these claims grandmother expressed in one breath. Tired from the emotional shock, Vincent listened to her, afraid to move. If he disobeyed her, she might throw them out on the street. But Amelie, despite her harsh nature, loved and pitied her grandchildren. She washed them, then fed them and put them to bed. But their sleep didn't last long because they heard shouting outside. Then there was a loud knock on the window. "Amelie, get up. There seems to be a fire in the cul-de-sac. Didn't your prisoners set Pompeii on fire?" Grandmother jumped up and threw her coat over her nightgown. She ran out of the house with her head uncovered, saying, "Vincent, you watch your little sister. I'll run and see what's wrong." Grandmother was gone for a long time, and Vincent fell asleep again. Emily appeared when it was light outside the window. She did not cry, but often crossed herself before the images. "Lord, rest their souls and forgive their sins," she said. Amélie did not immediately notice that Vincent was awake. She came over and sat down on the edge of the bed. "You heard everything, my good man," she said to the boy. "You and Emily are orphans now. Why did such grief befall the innocent angels?" The woman shouted the last phrase in despair. Emily woke up and cried. Grandmother Amélie pressed the heads of her grandchildren to her and began to kiss them. "What is it, my dears?" "God will help us. Don't be afraid. You won't be lost with me," she comforted the children. Vincent and little Emily stayed with their grandmother. Vincent remembered the word funeral well, but he didn't have to attend the ceremony, although his sister Zendaya persuaded her. "Amélie, you can't do that. It's their mother." "Zendaya, you can't say that about the dead," Amélie replied. "But Luba was a bad mother. She left nothing good in her memory. And there's no reason for the child to be at the funeral. Then I'll take them to their mother's grave to worship her. The first thing to do is to baptize them. We can't have children walking around unbaptized. I just don't know who I should ask to be my godparents." Aunt Zendaya was eager to tell them. "Nayli is a midwife by profession. I don't think she'd say no. She's family, even though she's distant. She can't have a child of her own, so at least she'll take care of orphans. And again, they're not other people's kids. Maybe then God will take pity on her and send her a child of her own?" Vincent remembered the smell of candles and the priest's long prayer. Emily cried the whole time. An unfamiliar woman named Nayli rocked her in her arms. The adults repeated some words after the priest and crossed themselves. The boy liked most of all the climax of the rite, when he and his sister were put a cross around their necks. The grandmother was very satisfied that she had fulfilled her main mission. Now the children will be under the protection of the angels, she told her relatives. Aunt Zendaya grinned. "And who will feed and water them? The angels?" Amélie slammed her fist on the table. "No blasphemy in my house. I will not give up my grandchildren. I will raise them myself. And by law, orphans are entitled to an allowance." Suddenly, Aunt Nayli intervened. She was the first person Vincent had ever heard of that there were orphanages. She said in a tone of voice that brooked no objection, "Your aunt will not leave you any children. Do not even try to solve this issue in your favor." Amélie's grandmother was indignant. "I have every right, because apart from me the children have no other close relatives. For what reason can I be forbidden to raise my grandchildren?" Relative Tien looked at the grandmother with a cold gaze. "The main reason is your age and health condition. Vincent will be placed in an orphanage. Little Emily will be placed in the children's home." Amélie was furious. "What am I supposed to do?" "You won't do anything. This matter is under special control and no one will allow you to go against the letter of the law." Tiana cut her off. "The only thing I can offer you is, well, I talked to my husband and he's fine with fostering the baby." "And Vincent? How can you separate brother and sister? Just take them both. The crown won't fall off their heads. I can visit the children and help as much as I can," Amélie said pleadingly. But Aunt Nayli didn't like the idea. She fidgeted and clumsily explained why she couldn't take in 2 children. "Auntie, you don't understand. My husband is a very busy man, and I'm just a free supplement to his person. That's not a joke. Stephen runs the family. I barely talked him into having a girl, so I'm afraid to imagine how he'd react to the idea of having a boy." Vincent heard all this and cried, huddled in the corner of the couch. It hurt him to be spoken of as if he were a doll to be given away. He barely waited for that nasty Aunt Nellie to speak and ran up to her. "Auntie, do you look like Baba Yaga? And your Stephen is Kashi the Immortal. I won't go to live with you myself, even if you ask me to." The women looked at the boy with amazement. Aunt Nellie was the first to comment on this outburst. "You can see for yourself how unruly the boy is. And this at 6 years of age. What's going to happen to him next?" Aunt Zendaya tried to intercede on Vincent's behalf. "It's not surprising with that kind of upbringing. In good hands, the child will do well." Aunt Nellie rolled her eyes. "Perhaps. But I'm not ready for such a feat. The girl is very young, and it will be easier for us to train her." Grandma Amelie interrupted a relative. "Nellie, you can train a kitten to go to the right place. You can't talk about children like that, and I doubt you'd make a loving mother. Personally, I'll be against the kids being separated." Unfortunately, no one took Grandma's opinion into account. It was only a few days later that Aunt Nellie took Emily's little sister. Vincent lived with Grandma for a little while longer, but strange women came to pick him up and took him away in a car as well. His grandmother cried as she said goodbye to him and whispered, "Vincent, you take care of your cross. Don't lose it by accident. It will protect you from any misfortune." All the way he clutched that church-consecrated amulet to his breast. He must have done it so expressively that one of the accompanying women asked him affectionately, "Little one, what are you there behind your sinuses? Are you crying?" The second woman advised her partner, "Look what's in there. Or what if he wants to sneak something nasty with him into a closed institution? Then we'll be reprimanded for it." The first woman looked him in the eye and smiled. "You show me what you've got there." Vincent liked this woman immediately because she was kind. He carefully took out a small silver cross on a thin chain from her pocket. The kind official stroked his head. "Thank you. You can hide everything, little one. False alarm. The child has an ordinary cross, no forbidden items." They had another long car ride, and the rest of the way Vincent thought that he would be very happy if this kind woman wanted to adopt him. But children's dreams don't always come true. Vincent spent 2 years in an orphanage. He has no good memories of this period, because every day the boy experienced humiliation from the older students of the institution, and not all educators showed cordiality and kindness to their wards. The idea to escape from the orphanage was born somewhere in Vincent's subconscious in the first days. Of course, the 6-year-old boy had little idea how to realize this plan, given that in the institution kids were under the watchful eye of educators, and it was almost impossible to do it. But despite the strict regime, there were regular escapes in the children's institution. Only the older kids dared to take such a desperate step, so Vincent had to postpone this plan until a more convenient time. The boy didn't share his intention with anyone. Only once he mentioned that he had a little sister, Emily, and wanted to run away to find her. But the fellow in distress did not hold back and told everything to Tiana. The nickname of the famous fairy tale character was given by the children to the night caretaker Tiana, who was characterized by a harmful character. Tiana first dragged Vincent out into the hallway and hung him by the collar of his shirt so that he began to choke. But for a woman with a damaged psyche, it was a pleasure to be able to abuse a child. "So, you little bastard, are you going on the run? I'll make you run away. You'll be afraid to go to the toilet?" she screamed. Vincent shouted, but no one dared to come to his aid, although a dozen or two kids were watching. Satisfied, Tiana went to the principal to report that the escape attempt had been thwarted. Since the boy was still very young, he was locked up in the infirmary for 10 days as punishment. Tiana came every night to see how he was doing. The woman watched him with her full face pressed tightly against the glass doors. In some wild rage, she shouted, "Are you all right there? Haven't you changed your mind about running yet? If it were up to me, I'd have you on your knees for 24 hours. Then you'd be silky smooth." Tiana added other unpleasant things like, "I wish your teeth would grow," and crooked Vincent couldn't be rude to her, because he'd get an extended sentence. Vincent endured the humiliation, silently swallowing his tears. Only at the very end of his imprisonment, Nurse Anna spotted Tiana during another act of bullying. Anna was shocked by what the employee, who was obliged by duty to take care of the children, was doing. She first tried to talk some sense into the inadequate woman. "Tiana, how can you not be ashamed? After all, he is just a child and you pour your anger on him. And what has this boy done to you?" Tiana didn't even raise an eyebrow. "Not yet, but he was about to run away. And you shouldn't feel sorry for such damaged people, because they won't grow up to be anything good anyway, unless the children of a normal mother. Maybe then a normal child would be born? And these genes are already spoiled. There's only one way to go to the zone." Anna started to chase the teacher away. "Stop this at once. I won't let you abuse a helpless child. And who are you to make such conclusions?" Tiana was already threatening Anna. Vincent heard Anna say, "That's enough, Tiana. Get out of here. I warn you, I will report your outrageous behavior to the principal today." Tiana shouted from behind the door, "I don't give a damn about your threats. I have worked here and will continue to work here, because no one will agree to wipe the snot out of these little brats for such a meager salary. That's why there's always a staff shortage in orphanages." Most likely, Anna kept her promise, because the cruel Tiana no longer appeared in the orphanage, although her departure didn't change the situation much. Vincent didn't speak frankly to anyone else. It was the first life lesson he had learned. But thoughts of his little sister Emily haunted him constantly, especially before bedtime. The boy recalled unhappy events and thought, "How is my little sister? She must be being abused by Aunt Rosa and her husband." The most surprising thing was that Vincent could never remember his sister's name. And when his parents got drunk, they just called the little girl Baby or Little One. Vincent couldn't remember the name of the town where he was born and where his mother died in a fire. The image of Amelie was also constantly in front of the child's eyes. Despite her promises, Nelly never visited him. He later learned from a caregiver that she died quietly soon after her grandchildren were taken away from her. Life at the orphanage was monotonous, except for those rare occasions when couples came to pick out a child. On such days, the older children and babies waited breathlessly to be chosen. But Vincent was terrified of the fate. "Let me do the talking." The mistress of the office did not like this dismissive attitude, and she already, without the previous optimism, said, "Well, I will not interfere with you while you chat here. I'm going to go check on the food processor." When she came out, Nicholas sat Vincent down beside her and said simply, "You see, brother, we've had the misfortune to have a son die of a terminal illness. It was a long time ago, but he's always in our hearts. At first, Rose and I thought we were going to live with the memories, but then we decided it wasn't right." Vincent made up his mind and looked straight into the man's eyes. "Why?" "Because you can't wallow in your grief. It just makes you feel more alone. And then we thought it was in our power to make someone happy." Until then, Nicholas had been silent. Rose sat down next to Vincent. "We've come here several times before. You may not believe this, but the first time I saw you, my heart fluttered." The boy marveled. "Does it happen like that?" The woman smiled. "It happens, but very rarely. Only on special occasions. And this is a very special and very important moment for Nicholas and me." Vincent saw the two adults looking at him hopefully and anxiously. There was a warmth from them that the boy wanted to cuddle into. He asked quietly, "Do you want to adopt me?" Nicholas replied, "See, do you understand? Our intentions are yours to decide. If you need time to think about it, we're willing to wait." "You don't have to wait. You are kind. I can feel it. I agree to be your son, and I will try to obey you in everything." Rose cried and held him close to her. The woman's embrace was as gentle as Vincent's grandmother's. I wanted to sit next to her for a long, long time. It was as if Nicholas had read his mind. "Thank you for giving us hope. We will try to be real parents to you." Later, when the first emotions had subsided, Nicholas said, as if by the way, "To fulfill all the desires of others, it is unpleasant and harmful. We are not going to suppress your will. Personally, I am in favor of arguing, because in the dispute is born the truth. But it has to be done in a kind way." Vincent didn't understand why he was speaking so strangely. The man noticed the confusion and explained with a smile, "Never keep your thoughts and feelings inside, no matter what they are. Share your joys and sorrows with us, and know that we will always help you." This assurance made the boy even more sure that he had a lucky ticket. In September, Vincent went to a new school, where he quickly settled in. The boy did not tell any of his classmates about his past life, and his foster parents praised him for that. Rose looked thoughtfully out of the window and said in a low voice, "You did a very sensible thing. People are different. Some sympathize with you, and some will rejoice at your misfortune. And there is no need for outsiders to be involved in our family affairs. The most important thing is that the three of us are always happy together." Vincent liked Brooks' house very much. He felt safe and comfortable there. The boy had his own room and desk to study at. In his spare time, Vincent could play computer games or go to the martial arts training center where Nicholas had enrolled him. His foster parents didn't demand anything impossible from the boy and never imposed their own opinions on him. Everything was going well, but the first alarm bell rang at the wrong time. Vincent was getting used to his new life when Rose said, "Vincent, we're going to go to the cemetery with Nicholas. We'd like you to join us. Of course you could stay home, but..." The boy felt ashamed that this kind woman was asking him for such a small thing. "I will go with you," he answered. The woman smiled, the expression on her face that Vincent liked best. She shouted toward the kitchen, "Nicholas, I talked to Vincent. He agrees. Tell me, when are we leaving?" The foster father appeared from the kitchen and said with a satisfied look, "I'm ready. We can leave right away." The teenager had no idea what awaited him in the next half hour. The foster parents, their heads sorrowfully lowered, walked to the ornate memorial. The entire complex covered a decent-sized area, and all the elements were made of black marble. A boy about his age was looking straight at Vincent from the monument. He lowered his eyes a little lower and read, "Brooks Vincent Nicholas." The 11-year-old's consciousness was burned by the thought, which he spoke aloud. "So, your son's name was Vincent, too?" Rose smiled again. "Yes, my good man. And we wanted to find a boy who looked just like him." Vincent really wanted to run away because he didn't want to be a copy of the dead man. But his adoptive parents didn't realize their mistake. They had no idea what was going on in the child's soul at that moment. Afterwards, such events were repeated regularly, and Vincent was obliged to go with his parents to the grave of his predecessor. It was then that he realized that good, kind people didn't like him. In his free time, Vincent could play computer games or go to training in martial arts, where Nicholas immediately enrolled him. His foster parents didn't demand anything impossible from the boy and never imposed their own opinions on him. Everything was going well, but the first alarm bell rang at the wrong time. Vincent was getting used to his new life when Rose said, "Vincent, we're going to go to the cemetery with Nicholas. We'd like you to join us. Of course you could stay home, but..." The boy felt ashamed that this kind woman was asking him for such a small thing. "I will go with you," he answered. The woman smiled, the expression on her face that Vincent liked best. She shouted toward the kitchen. "Nicholas, I talked to Vincent. He agrees. Tell me, when are we leaving?" The foster father appeared from the kitchen and said with a satisfied look, "I'm ready. We can leave right away." The teenager had no idea what awaited him in the next half hour. The foster parents, their heads sorrowfully lowered, walked to the ornate memorial. The entire complex covered a decent-sized area, and all the elements were made of black marble. A boy about his age was looking straight at Vincent from the monument. He lowered his eyes a little lower and read, "Brooks Vincent Nicholas." The 11-year-old's consciousness was burned by the thought, which he spoke aloud. "So, your son's name was Vincent too?" Rose smiled again. "Yes, my good man. And we wanted to find a boy who looked just like him." Vincent really wanted to run away because he didn't want to be a copy of the dead man. But his adoptive parents didn't realize their mistake. They had no idea what was going on in the child's soul at that moment. The boy from the orphanage served as a kind of altar for the couple, where they carried their parental love for their dead child. As Vincent grew older, he realized that he was just a sacrifice that the fanatical parents had made in honor of their dead son. This feeling was so strong that he again began to think about running away. But the boy decided not to hurry, to wait until he was of age. He now began to often lock himself in his room and shorten the time, communicating with peers and social networks. And before going to bed, as an old habit, indulged in his dreams. "As soon as I finish school, I'll leave this house. I don't need their money. I won't go to the institute either. I'll find some profession that I need, but I'll find money." And this plan Vincent was able to carry out in full. At Nicholas's insistence, he applied to the Polytechnic Institute in the same city where his adoptive parents lived. But after the first half of the year, the young man said, "I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an engineer. And in general, I reviewed a lot of things in my life." Rose was confused. "Vincent, what are you talking about? You're the most important thing in our lives. You're the most important thing in our lives." The young man interrupted his foster mother. "Rose, don't kid yourself and me. You're not doing everything for me. It's for him. The one I've been replacing for so many years. I don't resent you, but I don't want to be somebody anymore. I think I've earned the right to be myself." The couple looked at him with horror and pain. For a moment, Vincent felt sorry for them, but he knew very well that he could not go on like this. Nicholas read a lot in his foster son's eyes. He asked quietly, "Do you despise us now? You will not come to us anymore?" The young man again saw that penetrating look which confused his young heart then in the orphanage, and that pain came back to life in his soul. He put his arms around Aubrey Swan. "I'll never forget what you've done for me, and there's no one in the whole world closer to you. Please don't take offense, but I want to make my own life, and I'll visit you, because you're my parents too." Vincent made some useful acquaintances at the institute, and one of the faculty members helped him enroll in a college that trained specialists for the defense industry. The uniqueness of this form of education was that you could work and learn a very rare profession at the same time. Housing was also provided to all employees of the company on a rental basis. In 10 years, Vincent already had his own one-room apartment. However, his foster parents helped him buy it, and he had recently bought the car he had dreamed of for many years. Houston was behind him, and Vince returned once more to the navigator. Canyon City was less than 50 kilometers away. The excitement grew as he neared his final destination, and the man whispered, "I wonder what awaits me in a town with such an unusual name. Would I not find my sister there? Thank goodness I have her information now." Vincent spent years searching for her. He tried to locate his sister through the orphanage where he had spent only 3 years, but he was at first firmly refused this favor when he asked at least for the name of the town where he used to live. The lady in the clerk's office gave him a stern look and declared, "We are not authorized to divulge confidential information." Vince tried to explain to the woman, "You misunderstand me. I'm trying to find out information that concerns me directly. I wasn't 6 years old when my sister and I were separated, and now I want to find her. I think that's a normal desire, and I'm just asking you to help me a little." The lady hesitated for a long time, but then gave in. She first looked back at the door of her office, and then she drew the name of the township on a piece of paper. "It's a town, but 300 kilometers from here. Maybe someone there can tell you where your sister is." Vincent wasted no time and headed for the district town where he had spent the first years of his life. When he arrived, his memory began to jog his memory, and he found the cul-de-sac where he used to live with his mother. The burnt house was now a weedy wasteland. Suddenly, an elderly woman approached him. "Are you looking for someone? Maybe I can help you?" "I don't think you can help me. It's been over 20 years. I lived in a house that burned down, and I had a little sister." The woman clutched at her heart. "Oh my God, if it isn't you, Vincent, how grown up and handsome. A real one." The young man did not expect such a strong reaction and embarrassedly said, "It's me. You're not mistaken, are you?" He tried to smile, but it didn't come out well, and he only wrinkled his nose as if he had eaten a lemon. The woman wailed again. The way was hard. Your mother is your own blood, but I still feel sorry for her. It was an unenviable fate for her, and the girl Kira was taken away by a relative. Do you know where she lives? The woman waved her hands in despair. What are you? How should I know? He was about to leave, but the woman stopped him. If you go to your grandmother, she's also long gone. The house has been bought by newcomers. Talk to them. Maybe they'll tell you where to find your sister. Vincent went on his way, but the woman caught up with him again. Old age is no fun. It just slipped my mind. Go to Zendaya. She knows exactly where the girl has been taken. Vincent was surprised that he had forgotten about Aunt Zendaya, who was almost always at his grandmother's house. But he'd found her place of residence after a long wander among the low-rise houses that dominated the neighborhood. He went up to the second floor and rang for a long time at apartment number 5. No one answered, and Vincent wanted to leave. When he heard footsteps approaching the door, after a moment's hesitation, the man called out, "I'm looking for Aunt Zendaya." From outside the door, they also shouted, "I don't have any nephews, and I don't open to crooks." The footsteps began to move away, and Vincent had to shout half a tone louder, "Aunt Zendaya. I'm Vincent, Amelia's grandson. You must remember me." Footsteps returned to the door. While the landlady fiddled with the lock, a middle-aged, tall, gray-haired man looked out of the next apartment. "You mustn't believe her fantasies, or she'll say things that will blow your mind." Vincent didn't have time to say anything, because Zendaya herself interrupted his neighbor's remarks. He could hardly recognize the old woman who had bent down and made the obscene gesture as the stately woman who often appeared at his grandmother's house. The obscene gesture Aunt Zendaya complimented it with insults against the man. "Are you the one who is not at home?" "I'm still fine with my head. I don't steal gasoline from the neighbors' cars at night, and I don't run around with girls." The man's face was flushed with paint, and he slammed the door shut with a bang. But the cheerful, revenge-seeking old woman came to the neighbor's door and showed another obscene gesture through the peephole. Satisfied with herself, she invited Vincent into the apartment, which was a mess. Because of the mess, the woman didn't even offer him a seat. They stood in the hallway, and she tried to get a good look at him in the dim light of a low-wattage bulb. When the viewing was over, the old woman asked with undisguised irritation, "Well, tell me, why did you come? You see how I live, and nobody cares about me." Sensing that Aunt Zendaya was about to turn the conversation to her personal problems, Vincent told her the purpose of his visit. The old woman perked up at once. "Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" "You're looking for Kira, her. After her aunt took her away, I never heard from her. You should be looking for your aunt in Los Angeles. I don't remember the name of the city where she wrote to me, but I still have a card from her congratulating me on March 8th. The old lady hurried into the room and soon returned with a postcard. "Here you are. I don't need it. I haven't written a letter to anyone in a long time." Vincent took the card from Aunt Zendaya's hands and ran his eyes over the address. He could tell by the determined look on her face that she wasn't going to be hospitable. He took 2 5,000 bills out of his wallet and handed them to the old woman. "Here, buy yourself something tasty." The old woman smiled, but she clutched the money in her fist. "Vincent, are you leaving already? Can't we at least have a cup of tea together?" But the young man politely declined the offer. After such a cold reception, he had no desire to be stuck with his relative, and the atmosphere in the apartment did not dispose to cultural rest. On the street at the entrance, he saw a neighbor whom his grandmother had called bad names. He glanced at him. "I thought you were from the authorities, but it turns out a very distant relative. But whether she is your relative at all, I don't know exactly." The man was disappointed by the answer. "I was thinking that you will take to yourself this crazy, get rid of us from the evil neighbor. She has poisoned our whole life. She sleeps during the day and watches the street at night. She thought she saw the fuel being drained. But the worst part is the way she talks." Vincent knew exactly what this man wanted from him, but he said firmly, "Contact the police or social services. They will definitely take action." The man was stunned. "But she's your relative. Don't you feel sorry for your grandmother? If I remember correctly, Aunt Zendaya has children. Let them take care of her." He turned around and walked away from the yard, but he was caught up by the cry of a disgruntled man. "Wait. They'll give you the old man's ass in your old age." Vincent grinned to himself, remembering the same gesture Zendaya's grandmother had shown her neighbor. Suddenly a bitter lump came to his throat. He remembered staring out the window for hours, waiting for some of his family to come and visit him at the orphanage. But everyone had forgotten about him. And Aunt Zendaya, too, had never once remembered this nephew's existence. He went to the address his relative had given him at once, but disappointment awaited him there. The aunt and her family had left 12 years ago to the place of her husband's new destination. The line had been severed, and Vincent didn't know what to do next. As he tried to collect his thoughts, an inner voice awoke, "Go to your father. He can help." Vincent had never considered that option. He'd kept the fact that he had a younger sister from his foster parents. The reason for this distrust lay in his distant childhood. He remembered the day of the funeral and how Aunt Nellie had said she didn't want a 6-year-old boy as an extra burden. And he was afraid that if he told his sister's foster parents, they would be, at best, less than thrilled to hear the news. Later, when Vincent was an adult, it didn't make sense to tell them the big secret. But when he found himself at an impasse, The young man realized that his foster father's help could actually have a positive result, because Nicholas had connections even in the internal organs. His parents greeted him with genuine joy. Abi Swan couldn't get enough of him. "Vincent, thank you for coming. You have no idea how much we missed you." Although Nicholas was not as excited, he was also visibly overflowing with positive emotions. "Son, I'm sorry, but I won't believe that you just showed up. I've learned all your gestures for all the years you've lived with us, and I can see that you're very puzzled about something. What's your business?" Vincent summarized the problem. But the more he went on, the more surprised his father became. Then he asked with a hidden resentment, "Why didn't you say something all this time? If you had told me earlier, we would have found your sister long ago. Are Mom and I such scary people that you were afraid to confide in us?" Vincent felt ashamed of his past suspicions. Only now did he realize that, in spite of his difficulties, these people really loved him. And he didn't hold back. "Forgive me, but I used to think you loved your son, not me." Tears glistened in Abi Swan's eyes. She pressed his head to her breast, as if she were a child. "You've grown up, but you're still the same fool. How can you fake a love that doesn't exist?" Vincent closed his eyes, savoring the warmth that radiated from this woman. His senses overflowed and he wanted out. So he put his lips to Abi Swan's hands and asked softly, "Mommy, forgive me. I'm really a total dumbass." Nicholas watched this touching scene from the sidelines. Vincent thought for a moment that he too had tears in his eyes, but the man quickly got over his feelings. He said cheerfully, "Now, as punishment for your unworthy behavior, you'll have to stay with us for a week." "I'm sorry, Father, but only 3 days. I can't do more. I took a vacation to look for my sister. So every day counts." "Well, don't make excuses. I'll try to get some information." Nicholas kept his promise, and it took him only 2 days to find out the whereabouts of Kira Wilder. Aunt Nayli and her husband had adopted the girl, and now she had a different middle name, Stevenson. True, Vincent was not sure that the owner of this personal data is his own sister, so the guest period at the foster parents' house had to be shortened. As he said goodbye, Nicholas asked, "Vincent, maybe I should come with you. You know I'm going on a training camp soon." "No, Father, you shouldn't risk your health. It's a long journey, and the heat's so hot even the young can't stand it. I'll keep you informed. I'll be sure to let you know when it's all cleared up." "Okay, I'll take you up on that." The next morning, Vincent hit the road. Gorno-Zavodsk did not make a favorable impression on Vincent. It was a small provincial town that lived a measured life. When he reached his destination, the heat of midday had changed to a light evening chill, and the locals were going about their business. They gave him a few leering glances, but no one asked him anything. Vincent's first order of business was to get a place to sleep, and he asked a woman who was passing by, "Can you tell me where you have a decent hotel around here?" The woman laughed for some reason. "No, we have a hotel and a hotel are the same thing. It's just around the corner." While he was at the kiosk, the girl sat peacefully at the table and kept her eyes on the plate of food. The owner himself brought a fresh portion. "Help yourself, please." The girl ate very carefully. She was careful not to drop a single crumb, wiping her fingers with a napkin. Vincent thought that this little girl had been taught proper table manners, indicating a good upbringing. Children from dysfunctional families don't usually have these skills. But he didn't feel comfortable asking her questions, so he waited for the right moment. His body was sweating from the incomprehensible excitement. Vincent took out a handkerchief and rubbed his neck vigorously. The sudden movement made his cross pop out. The girl stopped chewing and stared at the cross. "Is it yours?" Vincent nodded. Yes, I had a little sister when I was little, and we were baptized together in church by my grandmother. It's my most prized possession. I've worn it all my life. You like it? Yes, I like it very much. The girl carefully wiped her hands and carefully pushed the empty plate away. She looked at Vincent and suddenly said, "My name is Emily." The man extended his right hand to her. "Nice to meet you. I'm Vincent. I'm here on very important business and I was hungry, so I thought I'd grab a bite to eat. How far away do you live? Maybe I should walk you home. It's late. My parents will be worried." The girl didn't answer. Vincent interpreted her silence as a child's reluctance to reveal where she lived. "Your mother doesn't let you talk to strange men, does she?" The girl nodded affirmatively. "Your mom is good. She's right, because casual acquaintances can be dangerous for little girls. Listen, you and I will do this. I'll go to the store, buy you something tasty. You wait here for me. Deal?" The girl nodded again in agreement. Not far from the kiosk, the sign of the shopping center was shining, and the man headed there. He quickly bought a small set of groceries and ran back to the kiosk. But the girl was no longer there. "She's gone," Vincent sighed. He glanced at the table where he'd been indulging in his gastronomic pleasure. The plate of shawarma he hadn't eaten was empty too. Vincent realized that the girl had taken the rest of his dinner with her. Poor thing. Why did she run away? Where am I supposed to put all this food? A little frustrated, he headed toward the hotel and placed the bag of groceries in the refrigerator in his room. After a tiring day, he showered and went to bed. Sleep immediately hit him. He was awakened by a cautious knock on his door. The sweet sleep didn't want to let him go, so Vincent looked at the clock, then out the window. My God, it was only 8:30. Who's come to get me this early? Probably the maids. The knocking came again, and he had to get up. What was his surprise when, opening the door, he saw Emily, the girl from yesterday. The little girl said politely, "Good morning. My aunt told me you lived here." The little girl pointed toward the front desk. Vincent had no choice but to invite her into his room. "You're here for a reason, aren't you?" Emily looked at him with wide eyes. There was something painfully familiar in that childish gaze. The girl was scrutinizing him, too. After a long pause, she said, "My mother sent me to you. She is very sick now, so she cannot come herself." "And why did your mother send you to me?" "We don't know each other at all." Vincent was amused at this ridiculous suggestion, but the little guest suddenly cried. "Mommy wanted to go herself, but she's not feeling well. She didn't get sick before and she went to work. We had plenty of food. Mommy always bought me ice cream on Sunday, but now she can't even get up. What would happen if Mommy died?" Vincent rushed over to the baby and began to comfort her. "Emily, please don't cry. I'll get my things together and we'll go to your mommy. And you sit here for now." The man sat the still sobbing girl in the chair. He really wanted to distract her from her sad thoughts. "Listen, Emily. You ran away yesterday, and I bought a whole bag of food for you. You haven't had breakfast yet." Vincent went to the refrigerator and pulled out a bag of colorful pictures. "Here, see what's in there. I'm going to wash up." The girl's face perked up at the sight of the food package and she began to examine its contents. Vincent spent no more than 5 minutes on his morning routine. When he was back in the room, the guest was eating a muffin with gusto. The man marveled once more at the child's thinness, but said cheerfully, "That's it. I'm ready. Take me to your mom." They wandered through the streets of the town until they came to the outskirts, where small houses huddled together. The private sector made Vincent's eyes grow dull. Until that day, life had never thrown him into such sad places. He was more accustomed to the tidy appearance of country villages. Here, poverty screamed from almost every house. Emily took his hand. "We live on an apartment in that house." The girl pointed with her hand at a dilapidated structure, painted in dark blue. The window caps, contrary to the notion of harmony, were painted in a poisonous orange color. Vincent was impressed by this unusual palette and thought, what a tasteless thing to do. What a wild combination. But he didn't have time to say what he thought, because Emily beat him to it. "Isn't it beautiful? My mom painted it." The landlady asked her to paint it, but she wouldn't give me the money for the paint. My mom cried. Then Uncle Sergei brought us 2 buckets of paint. Vincent only nodded, because he wasn't going to memorize the names of complete strangers. He did not ask who Uncle Sergei was, but the girl herself revealed the secret of this character. "Uncle Sergei is our neighbor. He works at the construction site. He has a wife, Aunt Olga. She also sometimes helps us. They always feel sorry for my mom because she is an orphan. And I'm an orphan too, because I don't have a daddy." Vincent interrupted the girl. "You have a mom, so you're not an orphan." At this point, they reached the gate, which was barely holding. "Don't open it too much, or it'll break off again. There's no one to repair it," Emily warned. "Uncle Sergei, you said yourself that he helps you." "He helps, but not for nothing. And now we don't even have money for bread because my mom doesn't work." As they wandered through the nooks and crannies of the private sector, the sun was already high and burning the ground. Vincent was anxious to get away from the heat, but as soon as he crossed the threshold of the house, the smell of mold and mustiness hit his nose. The man couldn't help but grimace. Emily looked at him understandingly and explained the origin of the odor. "I don't like the way it smells in here either. My mom says a fungus ate the house, but the landlady doesn't charge us much rent." A woman's cold voice came from far away. "Emily, did you come alone?" came a woman's voice. Vincent stepped forward with determination. "No, I'm here to visit." He walked from the dark hallway into a brighter, smaller room. "Emily said you wanted to see me, and I'd like to know why you're so interested in me," Vincent began, but stopped short. Because the same eyes as Emily's were looking at him from under the blanket. But there was something else about the woman's pained face that made him wince. It was a prominent scar above her right eyebrow, the exact same mark his little sister had. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Emily's mother opened her palm and Vincent saw a cross just like his. "Emily told me that the kind man who fed her had the same cross. That's why I asked her." The man immediately understood everything and rushed to the bedside. "Marina. Sis, if you knew how long I was looking for you." The woman from excitement strongly coughed. "Are you my brother? But my aunt did not say anything to me. I didn't even know I had a brother." A new fit of coughing prevented the woman from speaking. Vincent looked at her sympathetically, then at Emily. "We need to get your mom better first, and then we can talk. What do you think, Emily?" The girl rushed to him. "Mommy's brother, you're not leaving?" "Of course not, little girl. I didn't come looking for you so long to leave at once. I can't leave you in such a difficult situation. Emily, will you stay here with Mommy? I won't be long." Vincent went to the neighboring house, where, according to the girl, lived a kind Uncle Igor, who had sold them paint cheaply. A neighbor with a doll on her head was waiting for him at the gate. She gave Vincent an appraising look. "What are you, the neighbor's new boyfriend?" "No, I'm her brother. Does she often have men over?" The neighbor's eyes widened. God forbid. I'd never seen one. Then why the questions? Yes, that's what I thought. Vincent nodded. She's a lonely woman who needs a man, she said, clearly flirting. But Vincent wasn't interested in compliments. Kira's very sick. Can you tell me how to call a doctor? The smile disappeared instantly from the woman's face. I'll be right back. The neighbor ran briskly down the path to the house, but stopped halfway. What's wrong with her? What are her symptoms? When you call an ambulance, they always ask about that. A bad cough and a fever. For about an hour, they waited for the paramedics. The doctor first examined the woman with a critical eye, and when he listened to her lungs, he said in an anxious voice, "There is wheezing on both sides. We need urgent hospitalization." Despite the treatment, Kira's condition remained serious. Vincent had to stay in town because he had no one to leave little Dariana with. When Kira felt a little better, she told her brother her story. As she recounted her misadventures, the man's fists clenched tighter and tighter. Kira hadn't even been 3 years old when the tragedy had struck, so she didn't have the meager memories that had helped Vincent find her. Her aunt had taken the girl with her to the other side of the world, where her husband worked. Stephen didn't work in the usual sense of the word. The man was the owner of one of the mining companies. In the dashing 90s, he managed to orient himself correctly, and now enjoyed all the benefits of life. After all, the company steadily brought income, which provided a constant growth of personal capitals of Stephen's family. The businessman gave his consent to the adoption of an absolutely alien to him girl, not out of compassion for the unfortunate child. He pursued a completely different goal: to create a positive image. Therefore, this event he did not hide from the public, but on the contrary, he arranged a grand celebration on this occasion. About the good heart of Stephen and his wife, then a month wrote in newspapers and told on television. In a word, the PR campaign was successful. The reputation of the businessman only strengthened. The man even praised his wife for it. Amelie is a clever girl. She came up with the idea. I wouldn't have thought of it myself. Now I can safely run for governor, Stephen said. Nayli was afraid of her husband in her heart, because during their 15 years together he had repeatedly shown his despotic character. She would never have dared to offer to foster another man's child. But she liked the unfortunate woman's daughter very much. Nayli did not expect her husband to give his consent so quickly, and began to hurry with the paperwork. With her connections, it was possible to pass this procedure quickly. But Nayli, for fear of angering her husband, did not tell him what family the girl came from. The truth was revealed 5 years later. Kira, for the rest of her life, remembered this terrible scene, when Stephen in anger shouted at his wife, "You have no idea how you set me up. What the hell were you thinking when you took a girl from an alcoholic mother? There's no telling how bad heredity will play out in the future." Nayli was trying to justify what she'd done. "But Steve, it's not the kid's fault he has a mother like that." The man became even more furious. "I don't care about her at all. Don't try to make me feel sorry for her. It won't work. But I ask that from this day on, this woman does not come into my sight. Where can I put her? It's been years," Nayli pleaded. "Give her to an orphanage. If you have nothing better to do, get a dog. All the ladies of high society do that." Nayli tried to make one last but most powerful argument. "Steve, imagine how happy the tabloids will be when it's revealed that you've given the poor kid up to the orphanage. They'll talk about your name for a year, or even more, and it will reflect badly on your future career." Stephen slumped back in his chair. "You're right, aren't you? For the first time, I have to admit it. Still, try to keep the girl out of my sight. Let her live in the country, help our housekeeper. It'll do her some good." The next day, Nayli took the girl to the country village. Kira was crying. The foster mother first affectionately, then with irritation calmed her down. "Why are you crying? You are incredibly lucky that you have fallen into good hands. And nothing will happen to you if you live in the village. There's a school there. You'll study, you'll make new friends." For 2 months, Kira got used to life in a new place. She was lucky that her housekeeper Vivian treated her well. Once a month on weekends, the foster parents came to the cottage, and then Kira went to live in the outhouse. Stephen had ordered it. But life prepared a new test for the orphan. She was about 10 years old when Vivian said in passing, "I don't know why, Kira. All the trouble is falling on your poor head." The girl froze with a bad feeling. Something happened to Nayli's mom, didn't it? It did. They'd have a baby of their own. Kira was too young to understand the dangers of having another baby in a businessman's family. But she remained in ignorance for a short time. Suddenly, in the middle of the week, Stephen himself appeared and ordered the housekeeper, "Vivian, pack up the girl and I'll take her into town with me." The woman rushed to fulfill the errand. The man looked at the girl with an unkind look. "She's all grown up. It's time to repay the money spent on you. Will you look after your brother?" Kira was afraid to argue, but still asked, "What about school?" "They promised to send my drawings to a competition." Stephen laughed. He laughed until he was in tears, and afterwards he even stroked Kira's head. "Thank you for making me laugh. Although my mood has lifted a bit. I didn't even know I had a budding talent in the house. Another Picasso on the rise. Now seriously, you'll still go to school, of course, but I can't promise you any other hobbies." Kira hadn't enjoyed life much before, but she never thought that her existence could one day turn into a real hell. Little Emin was only 3 months old, but he was a big, strong boy. The baby had a capricious nature and demanded to be carried in her arms. For a teenage girl, this became an impossible responsibility. Her back and arms ached. One day she complained to Nayli, "Emin is so heavy, I can't lift him." The woman looked angrily at her adopted daughter. "What did you just say that for? Do you think I will cry out of pity for you? Do you like eating for free? You don't like babysitting your brother. It can't be helped." After Emin's birth, Nayli's attitude towards the girl changed a lot. If before she sometimes showed pity and compassion, now she was always yelling at Kira, and sometimes she used her fists. Once the girl was late at school because they had an event dedicated to Women's Day. She had prepared a gift for Nayli, a small box made of paper and painted with patterns. Everyone in the class looked at her work with delight, and the teacher even said, "What a lovely thing. Your mother will be so happy." But Nayli met Kira at the door. The look on her face didn't bode well. "Where have you been?" "Almost 2 hours late. I had an appointment at the beauty parlor." The girl handed her mother an original gift. "We had a celebration at school. We congratulated Mom. This is a present for you." Nayli threw the box on the floor and started stomping on it. "I don't want your presents. Take your box to your dead mother's grave. Let her be happy in the next world." Kira rushed to save her work, and the angry woman roughly threw her aside. The girl hit the door jamb painfully and screamed. Rose bent over her. "Why are you yelling like a baby? You'll wake the baby." Emin was crying in the nursery and Kira had to go to soothe the baby. All day long she cried. In her soul she hated the boy, because of whom her life had become a living hell. In the evening, Nayli came into her room. "If you're late again, you'll kick me out of the house. Do you understand?" Nayli asked threateningly. Kira whispered quietly, "Understood, Mommy." And stop calling me mommy. You're just like that to me, you're not a mare's tail. I have my own son, thank God Nayli cut her off. That was the final verdict for Kira's future. Since there was no help for her, she began to think about how she could escape from slavery. Of course, the girl could not even dream of entering the institute. Stephen himself ordered her fate when school was coming to an end. Will you go to college? At least you'll get some kind of profession. Nayli, see where you can get her a job so she can earn a living. It's time for her to be on her own. You've been supporting her for too long. Nayli got the girl into a construction college. Bricklaying is a lucrative profession. If you're not stupid, you'll always have money. There's a comfortable dormitory. You'll get a scholarship. Nayli made it clear that Kira was no longer welcome in their home. Even Emin, whom she had raised, was openly mocking. For losers like you, the only place for losers like you is on the construction site or in the garbage dump. And I'll become a businessman because my dad has no money. Kira did not want to argue with a spoiled boy. Soon she packed her things and moved into the college dormitory. Contrary to anxious expectations, within the walls of the educational institution she waited for an interesting life. There were constantly held exciting events, hobby groups. Kira immediately enrolled in the art studio, where her talent was noticed by a young teacher, Richard. This guy worked at the college for only a year, but during this time he managed to get an army of admirers. Girls deliberately visited his studio to talk to the attractive master. Kira also secretly sized for him, but even afraid to hope for reciprocity from Richard. The young teacher, though he behaved with restraint, did not refuse the attention of female students. He tried to give time to each admirer, but it did not come to a serious relationship. The girls in the group sighed enviously. Lucky to be the one who wins Richard's heart. His mom is also a college professor, and his dad is in a high position. Kira also sighed furtively, but never entered into such conversations. The girl cherished the rare minutes and hours that Richard devoted to her personally. After all, her works were sent to regional exhibitions, where they always took first place. Therefore, the teacher considered it his duty to develop the talent of his ward to perfection. One day he left Kira after class. Kira, I have a suggestion for you. Would you like to study on an individual program? I'd like that very much. And rightly so. You have certain abilities, but they need to be developed to develop them into a talent. I admit, I'm also fond of painting and I have my own studio. My father financed it, so I can in my free time to study with you. The girl was confused. But Richard, I don't have the means to pay for such lessons. The young man exclaimed with excitement. Altruistic. Don't you dare even think about money. It was a magical time. Kira rushed to Richard's studio every evening after college. At first, they only did creative work, but one day he himself suggested a little walk before going to bed. Then they went to the movies together. And once the man even invited her to a restaurant. Naive girl knew nothing about the intrigues of courtship. She thought that Richard was enchanted by her and would soon propose. So she agreed to continue the evening after the restaurant in his studio. A glass of champagne to put her guard down. And she melted into the arms of the experienced lover. After that unforgettable night, Richard became even more insistent in courting the girl. He gave her flowers and small gifts. In Kira's ears already sounded the wedding march, when suddenly came sobering. After 2 months of secret meetings in the studio, the girl realized that she was pregnant. She expected Richard to take this news with joy. But the man clutched his head. Kira, how could this have happened? You're not a young girl who doesn't know about contraception, Richard said reproachfully. Kira was confused. But I really don't know about it. And then I thought you'd be pleased. Glad? What do you mean? A baby. Did you really think I'd marry you? I'm sorry, but I already have a fiancé, and we're getting married this summer. Richard, what about me? What am I supposed to do? That's not my problem. Ask the girls in your group, they'll tell you where to go. But don't talk to me again. And we need to stop seeing each other. Kira did not immediately understand the meaning of the words spoken by his favorite man. She still in her heart hoped that he would change his mind and call her. But Richard defiantly avoided the girl, and soon came to the end of her studies in college. Kira did not tell any of her fellow students about her trouble. She decided to turn to Nayli for help. But when her foster mom found out about her situation, she wouldn't even let her in the house. I knew it. I had a gut feeling this was going to happen. How can a bad seed grow into a good plant? Go, Kira, and deal with your own problems. I have enough to worry about with Dick. The girl was desperate. She didn't know what to do or how to act. Suddenly she remembered her housekeeper, Vivian, and at her own risk went to her in the country. Although this woman was not known for her kindness, she still sheltered the pregnant girl. I won't refuse to help you, of course, because that would be inhumane. But I warn you, be quiet and don't bring anyone to my house. You realize you don't belong in a businessman's house. My house is not luxurious, but it's a good place to live. So Kira stayed with Vivian until the birth of her daughter. They did not need money, because Kira worked part-time as a repairman at private cottages. One day Vivian gave Kira a good idea. I have a childhood friend who lives in Durham. I want to move there in my old age. If you're interested, come with me. I'm sure there's a job for you there, and I'll look after Gracie. I'm getting used to the girl. I'm used to you too. You're like family to me now. Soon they moved to a small town. Vivian didn't stay long in the new place. The climate there was bad for her health, and after a year or so the woman died suddenly, and Kira was left alone again with a small child in her arms. A friend of the deceased patroness was not so merciful, but did not kick out a single mother with a child on the street. She offered Kira favorable, in her opinion, terms of rent of dilapidated housing. But she was glad for the opportunity. While Vince listened to his sister's story, he had experienced a whole range of feelings. But now he realized he'd been luckier than the fragile, teenage-looking woman. Kira was breathing heavily, exhausted from the experience and the long conversation. He leaned over her. It's all behind you, sister. We'll be together now. He pulled his cross from behind his back and kissed it. I marvel at the foresight of old people. If our grandmother hadn't wanted to baptize us then, we probably wouldn't have found each other. Did you pay attention to the downside? Kira smiled through her strength. Yes, my name is engraved there. The first time I saw it was when I was still out of school, but I wouldn't show my cross to Nayli. I was afraid she'd take it away from me. She never told me anything about you or Grandma. While they were talking, Dariana was busy with her dolls. Vincent gave his niece 2 dolls with sets of clothes. The girl was delighted with the gift. Wow, I have 2 girlfriends now. The girls will die of envy. In addition to the toys, Vincent bought her a tracksuit and a beautiful dress. The little girl liked the clothes too. Uncle Vincent, do you have a lot of money? Why do you spend money on us? It's my pleasure to spend money on such wonderful girls. I'll tell you a secret. When we get home, I'll buy you so many clothes that they won't fit in your closet. Dariana squealed with delight. Kira asked anxiously, Do you want to take us back to your place? Big Brother asked. Do you have other plans? How can I leave you here alone? Why do you have to worry? The man became serious. Kira, let's make a deal that from this day forward, you will never ask me stupid questions again. Do you really think I've been looking for you for so long just to leave you? You have no idea how much I've prayed to God or the angels all these years. I don't remember anymore, but my main dream was to find you. Kira smiled, a blush appearing on her weary face for the first time in days. Vince, I will obey you in everything. I want to tell you, too, that even now I'm afraid to believe I'm happy. The Swan family was about to leave for the town market when the doorbell rang. Abby looked at her husband suspiciously. Nicholas, who could it be? Or again, your domino partners showed up. The man began to persistently refute this version. What are you immediately on me? Maybe it's someone from the neighbors came for salt, or someone ran out of laundry detergent. Don't look at me like that. Open the door. Abby headed for the hallway with a disgruntled look, but she was immediately shouted at. Vincent, you're unannounced as usual. My father and I almost went to the market. Nicholas also came out to greet the long-awaited guest. Vincent made his way to his parents' apartment, and not alone. Kira, Dariana, don't be afraid, come in. He's found his sister after all. Well done. You did the manly thing. The arrival of the guests startled the couple, but it was Abby who was the most excited. What's the market now? We'll send the men out for groceries, and we'll make a nice healthy meal. Dariana, will you help Grandma Abby? Yeah, I'm always helping my mom, and I can even peel potatoes. That's fine, but I'm not going to give you a sharp knife just yet. You'll be our backup, said Abby. And you, Kira, feel free to get used to it. We're a family now. A year passed. Indeed, Kira and Dariana had found a real family. Vincent wanted them to live in his apartment, but the foster parents didn't want to let the girls go. They were so attached to them, they couldn't imagine life without them. Let them stay with us. We've already found a school, and there will be a job for Kira, Nicholas said. He himself took care of the girl's employment. She started working as a restorer at a historical site. There the young woman met an artist who soon proposed to her. In short, everyone's life got better. Only Vincent himself continued to be a bachelor. But the man knew that he still had the most interesting things ahead of him. It was just that the angels had not yet sung a song for him.